All right, I'm gonna share, because what good talk wouldn't have a multimedia presentation that comes with it? Yeah, so we're gonna talk about MAST. I mean, some of you all may have heard of it. That's maybe what brought you here. If not, we'll get into it. So as I noted, here's who I am. My name's Corey. I am a brand designer at Webflow by day. By night, I gallivant as a self-proclaimed Webflow tech lead, aka I like building stuff in Webflow, designing things, and then I also write code. I am building No-Code Supply Co, which MAST is a product of or has been launched under, and I'm building it with Max Lind, who is on this call as well. And then I am also a dad of 2 humans and 1 fur baby, my firstborn son, Mowgli, dog. Paul knows him well. And my kids are little and thankfully already sleeping, or maybe the older one that's 4 is probably still awake talking to himself, but here nor there. Favorite childhood show, Rocket Power, is especially like when I was a kid. And ironically, the main character in Rocket Power's name is Otto, and that is my oldest son's name. But it is not a direct pull. I promise. We just found the name, liked it, and then there happened this correlation. I'm not that weird. Come on. Okay, so MAST. We're, typical storyline here. Why the heck are you here? Why do you care? What is MAST? And then how would you ever use MAST? Plus we'll do a demo, ask questions at the same time, that kind of stuff. Like, honestly, the demo, it's like, I could, build a page in front of you, but is that boring? So I'm hoping as we go, I would love to keep this conversational. So like, please don't hesitate to just like unmute and stop me if you have a question. And then if I'm going to get to that answer later, I'll let you know. Otherwise, also drop it in the chat, whatever. So yes, please speak up. Cool. Jumping right in. Why should we care? What are we here about? If you saw on the first slide, MAST at the very highest level is a CSS framework for Webflow. But why would we use frameworks, right? So this is going to get a little meta, candidly, but I like meta and I like metaphors. So if you think about it, nearly everything that is created and maintained in the world today has 2 things in common: system and process, at least in the modern world. Let me clarify, we're not talking like 2,000-3,000 years ago or more. So by definition, at a high level, a system is a set of principles or procedures according to which something is done. And a process is a series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular end. Okay. So kind of think about those as we're going through. So if you think about like all the things, of course, we're here about designing websites and developing websites, but there's so many things that in one way or another have a process and a system involved. Anything from like the education system, government, brushing your teeth has a process, putting the toothpaste on, etc. And then one of my favorite ones in this parallel is building a house, right? So if you think about building a house, which in this day and age, in most modern, third world countries, this has become a systematic thing that has very strict guidelines in place for things to be done in a consistent way, right? And websites aren't all that different usually, but this is where it can get a little finicky with tools like Webflow, and hence why things like MAST exist. So when you look at them in parallel, right, building a house is design it, source materials, build it, inspect it, and maintain it. And it's all those same things for a website, if you think about it. But the only difference is like who is doing them, right? Like designing, and of course, is a designer for a website or an architect for a house, all the way down to, maintaining it when it's live. Each one, the owner is usually the one that's maintaining it. So we need to do things along the way to make, the end result as good as it can be for the owner. Okay, so it's no different from, house, website. So why do we use systems of processes, right? Like, what are the pros of that? And so I think there's 3 of them, again, at a high level, that all kind of correlate back to this. So one is efficiency. So instead of sourcing and building everything from scratch, we use available materials and tools, right? So like building the house, you're not going to go, I mean, maybe there's some pretty sweet shows on like living off the grid, but you're not going to go out in the backyard and hack down a few trees and then, run them through your own mill just to build boards for frames and things like that. Same thing with a website. Like in this day and age, 30 years later, since, the early days of HTML and CSS, like we have a ton of tools that can help us. And even when you're using tools like Webflow that on the surface is like, oh, this will do it all for me, there's still a lot of things that we can leverage to help us build more efficiently, right? So the other thing is consistency. So create a repeatable, high quality product while reducing human error and cognitive load. I think specifically the one I want to call it here is human error, that I think is another thing that people often don't consider with frameworks, right? And again, this is all particular to Webflow, but really this applies even outside of it, that like when you use a system that has a lot of things predefined and then you use it regularly, you get practice with it, it becomes habit. And it really like eliminates a lot of the things that otherwise when you're manually changing and tweaking along the way, that you might have actually accidentally made a mistake on, right? And so that's a huge benefit, again, in a lot of different realms, including developing a site. And then lastly, collaboration. So like they say, there's no I in team, and we can all create a better world when we do it together, right? So this is the same thing on the web, especially if you are working on a team that's developing sites for clients, or inversely, you're building sites for clients that then you'll pass it along and then they may have a team that maintains it. Either way, there's usually some exchange that needs to happen, and you need to have a common language, a translation that you can all kind of center around and know what you're getting into before you're just like, here you go, here's this wild, scary thing. So yeah, kind of makes sense, hopefully by this point. And I already kind of alluded to this, but the thing is that modern tools like Webflow almost make it too easy to just jump right in without a system and a process to guide you, right? And Webflow, I think one of the reasons I love it is it actually does still allow you to do things like these frameworks because it's still pretty close to to code. Whereas there's other tools out there like Framer is newer, or even Editor X and some of those that are still more on the design side, where like it's even more open range. So it's a little more chaotic, or maybe more potential for chaos than something like in Webflow, right? So thankfully, we have a whole internet of knowledge to learn from. Again, I'm sorry that if I just preach the Webflow goodness tonight, but y'all are here for that. So, I'm preaching to the choir, it's fine. So yeah, there's so many things because of the fact that Webflow is based around HTML and CSS, which is, the front end language of the web for now and the foreseeable future. There's a lot of things that we can pull from far more brilliant minds than myself. And even, some people in the community that like have built frameworks around CSS for years. The one in the middle that I have a little bit bigger is called Bootstrap. Some of you may be familiar, especially if you've been doing this for a while. Actually, at the company I used to work at with Paul, that was in the group, is like, that was the main framework we used, and all of the development teams used on the front end. And at that time, I was not using Webflow. I was mainly a designer, but have dabbled in code since college days, so 10, 12 years, I guess. And it was one that always stuck with me, and I really loved the efficiency of it, right? But it's just one of many. Like on the left there, Tailwind is super popular today, especially like for people, developing with React and more JavaScript oriented frameworks. And there's all kinds of other ones, including along the bottom, there's things that are also in the Webflow community, like Knockout from Edgar Allan, Client First from FinSuite, lots of options. And I think if anything out of this, I hope you realize that there are options and that you make up your mind based on what works for you and so on, right? So we'll get into some of that. So why MAST? After years of building different systems and processes to bring projects to life on teams large and small, we launched MAST, right? So like candidly, it took a lot for me, and a lot, big shout out to Max, because I feel like he's been such an amazing sounding board and collaborator in like making things like this happen. Because for me, MAST has essentially been this way that I've kind of evolved the way I prefer to build in Webflow since I first discovered it at my previous full-time job, which was ITA Group, where Paul and I worked together. So again, at that time, I was using Bootstrap, and I was like, how can I bring some of these practices into Webflow? Honestly, learned a ton along that path. And then in the last 2 years, so I've been at Webflow full-time now for 2.5 years. And about 6 months in, I introduced this concept of like, hey, we should start building on the brand team with a framework. And the brand team, we own all of the marketing side of webflow.com. And so we built this framework internally called Boilerplate that was very much informed by what MAST is now. There's only some slight differences. And then I also learned a ton in all the pages that we built with Boilerplate in the meantime. So we took a lot of those kind of concepts learned there, things from the past. And then I think the best part was Max and I had this like kind of fresh slate to just be like, all right, here's everything. And like, let's just take one big comb through it, find places we can find consistencies, iterate, get feedback. We had a lot of different like calls with different people from the community, agencies, freelancers, et cetera, understanding what people are doing. Because candidly, like you go on Twitter and it's like, everybody's using client first is what it seems like in the Webflow community. But what we found is the reality is that's not actually the case, is there's a lot of people, especially that have been at this for a while, that use their own thing. And then after we kind of showed MAST and teased some of that, it turns out it was like pretty similar to a lot of other people's mindsets. And again, I don't think it's because of anything we invented. It's just because of the nature of the web, and front-end development has kind of gone this way in the last, honestly, 10 years because of things like Bootstrap and stuff that I mentioned, right? So, all right, that's the why. That's the meta. Let's get into what specifically MAST is, or why we would pitch it against others, or not even that, just we feel it's strong, right? So the elevator pitch is MAST is a lightweight developer-first framework of essential classes and strategies to help you build efficiently for any brand and scale with Webflow. Okay. Whew, that's a long sentence. So we're going to break it down. The first part, lightweight and developer-first. So lightweight being, I think, one of the biggest things that I've learned over the years about at least my own preference of a framework is there are a lot of things out there that are intended to be a like toolbox filled with every tool you could ever need to build anything. And most sites, you'll probably use about 50% of the classes and things that come with that framework, right? And I always had a hard time with that because I just want things to be as simple and streamlined as possible. This doesn't only help with like maintenance and stuff like that, but it's just lightweight. It's you have a better chance of a better performing website, right? And then the other side of that is developer first. So we use this not as a direct jab at client first from FinSuite, but more as a way to kind of say this isn't necessarily for beginners. Like if somebody was to ask me, you know, hey, I'm just getting a Webflow, what should I use? I'd probably point them to Reloom, Library, FinSuite, Client First. Like there's so many great resources and much like, I would say, lower learning curve things to be known there. Whereas MAST, not that it's hard per se, there's just like, you know, simple things that have been consolidated because it's something that's much more familiar to developers. Or people that have been doing this for a while and can kind of get past those abstractions. Simple examples is like, we don't fully spell out, you know, margin bottom something. It's just MB1, right? It's just a lot of like concise things. Again, it's all in this mindset of lightweight. Next bit is essential classes and strategies. This is, again, kind of a reiteration of the point I made with lightweight, where essential is the key here. We are very opinionated about only using the things we feel are most necessary or most commonly used. Some of the biggest questions we've had, or most common questions we've had so far with MAST is like, you know, why is there not left and right spacing utilities? And why is there, you know, like, and the point is that, you know, I've built a lot of sites and I don't need those things for majority of the sites I use. So what we see in this framework is what we feel is just the essentials. And then the hope is that is also a guideline that if you need more utilities or more components or whatever, you can just go drop them on the style guide page and it's kind of your living documentation for every project, right? So the framework scales with the project instead of having this big bulky framework that will fit every project, but you don't actually need all of it, right? Last part here is build efficiently for any brand and scale. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself because I just alluded to that a little bit, right? The whole point too is that the framework is brand agnostic. And so not necessarily in a literal sense, like we'll look at the style guide in a bit, and we kind of made, again, some opinionated decisions to have it be pre-built with a custom font, a free custom font. So feel free to use it. And then some like pre-styled things, forms, buttons, etc. So that if you didn't really care as much about a specific brand or design, and you just want to get in and build something that looks decent, you could use MAST out of the box that way if you wanted to. However, the whole ethos of the framework and the approach is intended to be used for any brand. So step one, you will see in the docs and getting started, is basically updating type and styles and colors to align to the brand you're building for, whether that's an internal team or a client, right? Sorry, last bit there. Scale too is the other thing. We'll get into this, especially in the demo, right? But like the other thing that I've really learned a lot about is just like, you know, something we said when we first discovered Webflow in my previous job was like, we'll use it until we break it, or we'll use it until we can't meet the requirements of some project. And with a little bit of code and ingenuity, we have yet, and maybe now I'm not there anymore, but I have yet to see major use cases unless it's like such a radically massive site that it's just silly to even consider a no-code tool anyways, like that we can't meet. And so a lot of that inspiration is baked into MAST as well. Like, using like dry CSS, do not repeat yourself, and reusable CSS as much as possible. So it doesn't matter how many pages you're building for, whether it's 1 or 5,000, it's set up so that like you can confidently do that, right? So what makes it different? Especially, again, a common question we've had so far is, well, how's it compared to client first? How's it compared to knockout, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? We would love to take the high road here and not have a comparison table of 1-to-1 and all that, and instead just talk about what we feel is strong in it, and hopefully people can make up their own opinion on what's best, right? So the first value prop here is less is more. Again, some of this might sound repeated, but the concept is less classes, less elements, less maintenance equals faster site development and customization, right? So simple examples here is like, if I was comparing to client first, you build a section and container and it's like 4 different elements in HTML just to do that. Whereas, this is pretty bread and butter of just a section and a container. And, that again, for most smaller sites doesn't really matter, totally fine. But if you're talking massive sites or things like even No-Code Supply Co, where we're, pumping in thousands of items on the homepage, and you're hitting like DOM limits basically, or you have the potential to hit DOM limits with like Google Lighthouse and some things like that, like it's important to at least consider keeping things as tidy and concise and lightweight as possible, right? The next one is create versus copy. So build from scratch with a central set of building blocks versus finding and modifying pre-built templates and components. So this one, like, this one's got a soft place in my heart, because again, I want to be clear that like we will recommend Reloom and component libraries all day long. They're incredible. However, the thing that has always frustrated me pre-Webflow days, the before times, was that I would spend days, hours, weeks looking for the perfect WordPress theme, or the perfect, like right before we found Webflow at ITA, I was building just like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript sites off theme forest templates, like no CMS. I was so burned out on WordPress, Drupal, etc. I was just like, give me the code that I can just modify for what I need. And even then I would spend so long finding that perfect thing. And then even the direction of design, like at the end of the day, I just want to create the best experience. I want to design the best experience and have the best user experience and accessibility I can. And it always felt like I was first finding this box, or this hole in a template or a component. And then I was trying to like shove the use case into it. You're like modifying it to fit your use case. And that was just always felt backwards to me, because in design, like I start from a blank canvas. Sure, maybe I have something, some type system I built or something like that I can start from, but the experience is centered around the use case and the client. And so coming into Webflow, every site I've ever built has always been from scratch, but it's, still using a style guide or a framework like this to get going and have these building blocks. Then I can build whatever layout I need to for the use case, right? So hopefully that makes sense. This one, again, I'm passionate about. And then lastly is tried and true. So MAST is an opinionated approach defined by 10 plus years of front-end development best practices. So the first keyword is opinionated. Again, decisions that we made in the framework and the base style guide are all out of, experience and what we feel are the most common and helpful utilities and things like that to get you going. And, we wanted, like, especially this is Max and I talked a lot about this topic in general, because it was just like, I think this was the route that we could also take of like, not feeling like we need to rationalize every single decision, because we're confident that we have rationale, but that sometimes it's based on like our opinion is this is the route to go. That doesn't mean that like everybody needs to just agree with it. We hope that you'll modify, rework, ask questions, etc. Right? And then the other part here is the 10 plus years. Really, like this is based out of especially I would say the biggest thing is like the column system or the layout system in MAST is based on Bootstrap. We did not build it as well. A saint of a human being named Kevin Hool, I don't know how to say it, in 2017 published a clonable on the Webflow showcase of essentially recreating the Bootstrap 4, I believe it was, the version 4 framework or the version 4 column system when they moved to Flexbox. And I remember discovering and be like, oh my gosh, this is so epic because I'm already so used to this column system. And so something I've found super interesting is that something like Bootstrap that I think is still very commonly used today, very popular, after all these years, still uses the same core approach of their column system. And in my opinion, that says a lot about the tried and true nature of it, right? They could go full on CSS grid and some further abstraction, but they haven't. And I refuse to believe it's out of laziness and more of just like, because it works. And that, yeah. All right, so what can we build with it? I already kind of alluded to this as well. You can build anything, right? Another question we had after we launched was, hey, can we see some examples of stuff, right? So I probably should have had this up. Landing page. On the landing page, there's this section called Mass Made, and you have all these sites. These are real client sites, most of which that I've built on the team at ShapeMaker. So one of the kind of studios I've worked with the most over the last 3 years is this team called ShapeMaker. It was just me and the founder when we got started, and now it's a team of like 7 or 8. We built a ton of awesome sites over the years, and we've always used this general approach. It has never had a name until now, and so there's this orange bar in all of these that you can open up directly in Webflow if you want to see the back end or just view the site. And note that these are all labeled with like pre-release version because like, again, it didn't have a name. And even if you go to the style guide page, it's not going to look exactly the same because, this has now kind of been launched as this holistic thing. And so all the same concepts are there. Maybe some of the class names are like slightly different, but all the underlying styling is all the same. And so this is one of those two where, I was very grateful for ShapeMaker and team for being cool with like us cleaning up some of those client sites. These are also duplicates of the live site, so there's no risk of private information or whatever. And yeah, so go check those out. And ultimately, that's the gist, is you can really build anything with it. Again, even enterprise level at Webflow, we're building lots of pages across like 15 plus projects that are all proxied together for webflow.com. So it's lots of demoing and testing with it over the years for sure. So the how, it's pretty straightforward. There's docs. They're in Notion right now. They're on the site with this big orange button. Go check them out. We are working on moving these over to official pages on the site, but we really just wanted to follow this practice of just getting it out. Live is better than perfect. And yeah, so please let us know feedback. We tried to be as holistic as we could, not only just going over the basics, but also talking about some of the underlying things. Like I mentioned, the create, don't copy, 80-20 rule. We have some other kind of just meta level things that try to explain our thinking in it as you go through. And then the other half, if you will, of frameworks, especially just because of the nature of working with tools in Webflow, is there's a style guide. So every project that you would like to build MAST with would start from this clonable style guide. So go to the landing page, click on it, clone it, and then this becomes your page that you will start everything from. And so that's what we'll get into the demo, what that would look like. Simple things you can tweak. And again, the nice part about this approach, again, that's not really original to MAST. This is just, a general best practice with building sites in Webflow, is to have a style guide page that the future owner or developer can reference for, high level utility type styling across the project, as well as things like, type sizes, colors, base utility things like buttons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lastly, I think this is my last one. Nope, I guess one more, but it's just questions, is learn and practice. So I think, this is the biggest takeaway, is MAST is not intended to be, nor do I think any framework is intended to be this just one solve all, and you'll just have no knowledge and be up and building in no time. There's so much to learn around the web. And I think that's half the fun, right? There's so many of the things that you can, work more efficiently and produce a better quality product at the end of the day by learning all of these other things. And MAST definitely comes with a good amount that will help you get there. But there's so many other things, especially if you want to understand the underlying like why and reason and how things are built in MAST. Learning a lot of these other concepts is super helpful. And there's not specific ones. Ultimately, it's like HTML and CSS, accessibility, a lot of those other things that are shown here. I don't want to be too prescriptive, but yeah, that's the underlying thing is, yeah, learn and practice, yo. And then lastly is questions and demo. So that's all I got. And then we can get into, yeah, jamming on it. Woo! Drink, any questions, etc.
I got a question.
Woo!
So when you're setting, and maybe you can do this in your demo or whatever, when you're setting up your project, and this is something that I've used Client First for, some projects, and what I like about Client First is that it gives me like you're talking about a system, a process, a guideline for like, name your things this.
Totally.
And what I find, so I like that. But I do find that when I first start out and I like go and I do the clonable or whatever, and I'm like setting up my styles, like it can be like, or maybe I'm just slow, but it feels like it's a huge lift to get to the point where you're like, all right, now I'm building my thing. And what I'm wondering is, what is that lift with MAST? Also, where did MAST come from, out of curiosity?
Great question. The short of it is, No-Code Supply Co. and the name with that is inspired out of like old school general stores and hardware stores. And specifically one that has always inspired me is I have family that like, I'm really close. We're really close to my brother and sister-in-law, and both of them went to school in North Carolina, like up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, like Boone and Banner Elk, that area. And there is, let's just Google it. There's this MAST general store, North Carolina, that is like stuck in time. It is so epic, y'all. It is like old wood. You literally can't move a toe without like creaking, floor breaking sounds, and just like stuff like, look at this backdrop, like epic, right? And so I love just like this vibe. And so MAST was like, honestly, the name was literally from there. And then the more Max and I were talking about other names, at one point we wanted to call like Timber, but like there's already like 5 Timber CSS frameworks out there. And then the more we talked about it and tried to get like cheeky and literal with it, the more it was just like, let's just do something that's like easy to remember, simple, rolls off the tongue. And MAST was one that came back. And then we asked a few people and like it resonated. And then like, lo and behold, there's all these other kind of underlying meanings. Of course, like mast of a ship.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. It could be like this centerfold, but then like somebody else, Nathan, is a sales engineer on the Webflow team and just huge Webflow fan and pro. And he like is building a farm, ironically, also in North Carolina, and was telling me about like MAST trees, I think it was. And like, it's this whole method and process of like, building an acreage of trees that produce something. And this, I don't know. It was this whole underlying thing that also at the end of the day, does it, like it, as a designer, I want to rationalize it so deeply. And I think part of me is like, I just like the name MAST. So yeah. So setting it up so I can show the base one. And then one thing that just came to mind is that might be helpful is like, let's show a live recent one. So this is somebody that works out of the same design studio in Des Moines here that I work out of most days of the week when I'm not working from home. And this is a client that's kind of theirs and another people. And one of the first, at least like directly to me, that has used MAST, right? And so you can see a comparison maybe side by side here, right? Of just like, you open up the style guide, intentionally, you just delete this and this becomes your homepage, and the style guide page, or it already is your homepage, and the style guide page is separate. And so to answer your question, like, I wouldn't say there's any magic sauce here that will speed up that process or any of that. Like, I totally hear you that like, it does just like it's a little painful, or just like, it's just a little time consuming to do. But I think especially like this project, just while it's fresh in my mind, is like, I suggested to the designer, the developer doing this, her name's Liv, that like, hey, just like even before the design or while the design's in review with the client, or even before, once you're kind of pretty confident on the direction of type and buttons and etc., I would go ahead and start getting your style guide going, is my typical approach, right? So that way I can like pick away at it for a couple of days, update buttons, whatever I need to. And then it's also like just a start. Because the other thing I've learned over the years is like, I'll do my best to get it set up right at the beginning, but like I frequently come back to the style guide while I'm building to tweak things. Like some of the most common things are type sizes, I think, like headings, because once you start actually flowing copy in and you see, you know, like how things like this are flowing, right? Like you might want to, you know, bump things down a little bit from what you had in Figma. And that's the beauty of doing it in Webflow, of course, is you have that direct connection to the final product. So I don't know. Is that helpful? I mean, it's like, yeah, I wish I had a.
No, I mean, I know I think what I'm hearing is like with any framework, if you're going to set it up and customize it for your brand and your design, there's going to be a lift.
Totally. Yeah. And it especially because like, I think client first is similar, you know, where like, the style guide also serves as a doc, right? It also serves as this tool later. So it's both about like, you know, setting up and getting all the styles and fonts and things added, but it's also about like something I love about the way we kind of approach it with MAST is it's formatted nicely so that like, and it's also built using the same column system. So like if I want to, what the heck did I just hit? Allow. Yes, I want to allow. Is that a Zoom thing? Okay, there we go. If I want to do a second, you know, font, I just copy and paste the column and update it and keep going, right? And it's using the, you know, most of the same styles of the framework itself to build the style guide, right? So like even as you're doing it is a way of learning it and seeing what utilities are applied and all that kind of stuff. There's only like certain very specific classes that are all labeled with this like styles __ for the style guide specifically, but we tried to keep them as slim as possible, right? So yeah, it's going to be work one way or another, unfortunately.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Can you take us through a little bit of it? I mean, unless someone else has got questions, I think I'd love to see a little bit of it in action.
Live action. I think this is what's funny is like I think the best thing to show usually that I do show is the column system, just what it looks like to build layouts with something. And honestly, I probably should have been more prepared in building like a specific layout. Now that I think about this, I think I was gonna like pull some stuff like this in. This is Untitled UI, if y'all have ever heard of that. Jordan Hughes is a just madman designer in the Webflow community. Built this massive library of UI. And so like I could build, some of these layouts quick, probably at least like a hero section or something, right?
Yeah.
So, and maybe just please stop me at any point if y'all have questions. And just for safekeeping, I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this because sometimes I've like demoed it to people and then you know, like I forget to undo, and then like, you know, that's like the live style guide project right there. So let me duplicate it. All right, here we go. So again, first thing I would do using MAST is come in and go ahead and apply all of the brand specific things, right? So again, if we look at this real site as an example, you know, duplicating this, pulling in the fonts, labeling them here, going through, and maybe I'll even explain each section would probably be helpful of the style guide. So the first thing you see here is, and we'll just even stick to this version, is you have a column for the HTML element. So in Webflow, you will not see classes applied to these. You know, to style these, you click here and do all H1 headings. And then you have a class that is intentionally identical to the styling of the element. And the point of this is for accessibility mainly, right? So that when you have a new section like this, within each section, we want to start with an H2 usually. And so I want it to be semantically an H2 element, but maybe my design wants it to be the size of an H1. So I can just pop on the H1 class. And the key with having them consistent is then if on one page, the actual H1 is used, and then another page, the class is used, we of course want those to be the same. per the design usually, right? So that is the point here of interchangeability. Some other things to note on headings specifically is a couple things. One, there's only 4 levels, and that's on purpose. So in the docs, we call out, man, that is just like searing my eyes. It's so bright. Can I see the dark mode version? All right, this is so much better. We call out in here somewhere that I, again, should have had up, that we only use 4 levels on purpose. And we reference a video that talks about just like type hierarchies and how to build an efficient type hierarchy system, right? And so this is where we get a little bit more into, I referenced the video right here with type systems, right? So we get into this like underlying level of not just development, but like what is good design and how can that be part of the framework? And so the theory and thinking behind a minimal heading system is that you have less options and more opportunity for change or hierarchy, right? The ideal state, like that video will say, is like each heading should be half the size before it to create a lot of contrast and drama and emotion in the design. Candidly, that's like rarely realistic to go to that extent, but I often try to still make them extreme. And then the other thing to know is like, some of you may just mostly be developing and somebody else has already designed this, so you don't necessarily have that option. And that's totally fine. If that's the case, then again, just look at the structure here and, you know, we just have some divs with the utility class and spacing. And so if I want to add, if I want to add a H5 here, why can I not copy? Yo, I can't express the amount of times I've tried to do some live demo and this stuff happens. It's just like, it's like a ghost is following me or something. It's like I have a keyboard ghost, right? I don't know. So if I had H5, that's totally fine. Like I'll just update my docs here and I'll add H5, right? And maybe actually I would even just like duplicate the H4, H5. And then, you know, I do what I need to do. Maybe it's 1 rem and that's about it. Maybe let, you know, more bottom margin or something like that, right? So you can update this per the pattern that's already here to match your design and standards, right? And then the other thing to call out is what I just updated there is default margin on headings. And this is, again, a contentious point. A lot of people love to just normalize everything. And, you know, normalizing usually means just like remove all base everything. And so all headings should have 0 pixels or 0 any unit, top and bottom margin, right? Of course, we have 0 on top, but we feel that having an existing bottom margin allows you to like go ahead and just start building layouts, right? If I come back down here, I have a heading and then I'm going to add a paragraph. And I already know that I want, you know, this is a very common pattern, heading and paragraph. Like we all, you know, go like get frustrated seeing the same thing. And so we know that we want that consistent spacing. And when it's there for us right out the bat, again, it's lightweight because it's faster and more efficient. I don't have to like think about what was the size of bottom margin I was adding to all my H2s. I can't remember. And then the other end of it is if we use it this way, there's less classes in the DOM, so less technical text being rendered by the browser, and it's globally editable, right? So if the client decides later on after we've built most of the site, hey, actually, we want more space under all of our H2s, then I would just come and bump that up, right? And then since I did it to the actual H2 element, I would make sure to come back and do it to the class as well, because they should always match, right? That is the point, is that they're interchangeable, right? So
you have the smartest clients in the world that are coming to you and saying, hey, we want more padding underneath our H2.
No, it's the inverse, actually. I love every client I've ever worked with. It's the inverse. Here's an example, a real example. And ironically, I want to be clear before I say this. I love all no-code tools. That's why no-code supply co is not Webflow supply co. But an example is when all the hype has come out about Framer, right? And that same week, I was like, sweet, I'm going to give Framer a try. I'm going to play with it all week. So I did. And that same week, I had a client, longtime client, came back. We were doing some updates, and it was a new CEO. And she's like, hey, can you just like tighten up the whole site? Like everything just feels too spaced out. So I was like, sure. Done. 50 pages updated like that. because of freaking CSS, not Webflow. Let me be clear, CSS. Webflow is just allowing you to, control CSS. And so it's instant. And in Framer, a lot of other tools that don't follow CSS, you have to go to every single section and tweak that spacing and make sure that you tweak it just right. Otherwise, it's very easy for it to be off. And yes, there's probably ways to use like fixed height components and fake spacers and stuff, but like the point is that global style is so powerful if you really take the time to like think about it and strategize with it and use it, right? And type is just one of those examples. So great question, Kyle. and also just a real thing, right? So yeah, that's headings. Going through, paragraphs, again, same kind of the concept here. Like these are just starters that we find common. If you have other ones specific to the brand, I would just update them directly here, class name and all. And if I needed more, I would just, okay, let me copy and paste this time. Look at that. Then I would just duplicate them, right? Like maybe now I need a paragraph 2. And so I'm just going to duplicate this and I'm going to do a paragraph 2. And you're going to be like, wait, why is it 2? Oh, it's rem. So, the other thing is that like we use units strategically. Thank you. Hold on. My wife, my wonderful wife just brought me this like warm apple pie and ice cream.
Oh.
And I'm sorry that this is a talk, but I'm going to have a bite. And so, yeah, the point is that like another thing you might see in the Webflow community, including with Client First, is rem everything. Every unit should be a rem. In fact, you can go into their Epic, let me be clear, Epic, Chrome extension, and I think you can even like rem, there's just like a button to do it somewhere. Yeah. Yep. And right here, pixel to rem migrator, and it's just like boom, detonate everything, right? Not actually. It's all for good because ultimately it's still better than everything being pixel, again, for accessibility, right? So if people change their base default font size on a browser, everything should kind of, not everything, but type at least should accommodate that respectively, right? And so we're using rem here that we link in the docs to, this is the one I use all the time, is just a converter. If you're like, oh, the designer said I need 24 pixels, boom, 1.5 rem, right? So it's pretty basic math as well. It's just 16 pixels is usually the base font size times whatever. And even to that note, another thing, that you may do in here as even an earlier type step is adjust your body font, right? All pages to some other font, some other size, and everything should respectively, adjust with that because it's all built that way with that intention, right? And so, yeah, you go through, update your type and stuff. And then color is the next section. So same kind of thing. You can see as an example here, the designer kind of pulled in most of the brand colors, right? And this is, again, one of those things where I would recommend don't actually do every brand color under the sun. Only the ones you have in the website is I would say, just like anything with this, just use what you need. An example is the Webflow brand palette. Brand at Webflow is pretty massive. We have all these colors, and our boilerplate framework starts with blue, the primary blue, and then like 3 shades of gray and a black. That's it. Everything else, if you need it in a project, you go add it at that time. That's the point of the style guide, is it's a living document, right? And so, yeah, add in your styles. Again, these are added in a way that's hopefully strategic. So they are a background utility class. So instead of, adding the color as some arbitrary style guide only class, they are just leveraging a background class. And so the benefit of that is I could be like section BG light gray, and boom, I can use that anywhere. I can use it on a card, I can use it on a page, whatever, it doesn't matter. So we're both, again, leveraging the docs to add the utilities and colors and things, as well as then going to use them across the site. Another thing to note on the, oh yeah, question?
What does that U stand for? So BG is background and then U is?
Utility.
Okay.
Such a good question. Thank you so much. Seriously, ask those kinds of things. Like, so again, this was actually a learning from the boilerplate system at Webflow. We started using this approach before my time there of CC as a prefix. And so again, naming and nomenclature, a lot of this comes from pre-Webflow for even things like Client First. And so prefixing is very handy on class names to make it very clear what things are used for, as well as like prevent accidental overrides. The point of CC, as an example, is that if I had, let's like show a real example. If I had, I don't know, a section that I wanted to use a custom class for, and I just called it purple, right? And this was intended to be just a purplish color on the section. That's not purple. Come on, like I'm a designer. And then somebody else comes in and they're like, I want text and I want it to be purple. And I actually want it to be, you know, this color of purple. Of course, it's not going to do it because of the order, but the point is that you could accidentally override things two ways. I should have done that in the opposite order, right? And so doing something like CC on this prevents that from happening, because you would never name a custom class with CC out the get-go. You'd only use it when it's a combo class, is what that stands for.
So that would be like when you do, sorry to keep going back to the client first.
No, I love the questions because then I can eat ice cream.
Yeah, no, that would be like, I think they do like a lot of like is blank, like is
boom.
Yeah. It's like is purple is what you would say, like, you know, is purple. Or
and
is disabled, is enabled, is, and what you're saying is no, like that would be a CC dash.
Exactly, right. And that's just a preference thing. I think is still great. And that's one of those things where, like, if you wanted to use MAST but use is, like, do it. There's nothing in MAST saying not to. It's just like, that's our opinionated choice, right? And that comes from BEM, which is what client first is also informed by in terms of nomenclature. BEM stands for block element modifier. Just Google BEM CSS. There's all kinds of stellar content out there about it. And it's just one of the earlier, or maybe like most longstanding ways of naming classes in a consistent, structured way, right? And so we go through a lot of these things in here on how to name. The other thing is, like, especially if you already use client first, we are basically, if for custom classes, when you do use them in MAST, which it's encouraged to use them if you can't build a layout with the column system, etc. It's the same nomenclature on purpose. Both because candidly, we were already doing, I've been using that approach for years, not to like stake claim on it or anything. It's just a very common thing. It's not a client first only thing. And then the other benefit greatly is that they have tools like their folders in here that allows you to like bulk edit class names. So I don't even know if there's a good example in here, because this is like the base thing. But if you have, you know, like a class that is, you know, named with an underscore and then dashes after, you can bulk rename those things because it's following their same method, right? Another thing while we're on the topic of nomenclature, and this is a difference between something like client first, is we choose to use numbers to represent everything. Not a fan of using S, M, XL, L, XXL, because what the frick is XXL? Like, that is a learning curve that is not necessarily needed, in my opinion. Like, it just makes it more confusing because that number could be different from one side to the other. And candidly, maybe that's the strategy. I just feel, and we feel like that is, it's best to be as clear and direct as possible with what classes are for, especially for when other people come into your project and build stuff after you've already done so, right? It just, clarity is good.
You go through the column deal?
Yes, totally. One quick other thing I was going to mention on color is there's this page wrapper element. This is also pretty common. And you might be like, I don't want dark mode. Like, that's dumb. You can like pretty quickly just go ahead and switch the page wrapper to, you know, black text or whatever your base is and white. And then that will update everything automatically, including all these cards. You don't have to like go through individually and update them. We built everything strategically so that it can be switched from light to dark with just those two quick changes. So that's a helpful tip. And then, yes, let's get to the column system. I'll briefly scroll through the rest.
Well, hold up. How does that work?
How does that? I mean, it's pretty simple in terms of just like, you know, we're not applying font colors or anything to any of these individual elements, as you shouldn't in your live site, right? Unless it's explicitly for a reason. So all of these are just based on, you know, either the body or in this case, the page wrapper.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it's just independently changing everything. And then the one area we got a little clever with it is I'm using the page wrapper around these elements so that you can't see this, because like if I got rid of that, this is what you wouldn't be able to read that very well. But I wanted this like, you know, bluish aesthetic, because the point of the bluish aesthetic is it is a style guide only specific thing. that is meant to kind of brand MAST even when it's been rebranded for other things. Like candidly, it's a little bit of a marketing play subtly. But yeah, you can see like this example, right? It's still presented in a way that, you know, this is specific to the style guide, but does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so quickly, forms, buttons, we have a card in here is the only like kind of pre-existing component, mainly because we're using cards and all these other, you know, like UI elements, and it's just a really common thing. One other section in here is prevent style cleanup. What this is for is if you know, create styles and classes in Webflow that then you use in code and embeds or page code, and then that's the only place you use them. You need to make sure to like put that a duplicate of that on this page in this section, so that way you can keep your classes clean in here. We have a rule in MAST that I will preach from the mountaintops to clean up your damn classes when you're done, because otherwise somebody else will come along and see 1,000 unused classes in there and get stressed. And we don't want people to be stressed. We want people to be happy and build epic stuff, right? So next thing is utilities here. So again, we have some base level utilities. One thing to note is they're all M based, and this is on purpose again. And the purpose mainly is that one of the most common things I've used margin and spacing utilities on is type. And when you do it on M, so for example, if I add a, you know, MB3 here, this amount of space, instead of having to adjust it at every single breakpoint, when I'm adding it to a font, or text that has a font size, the M will, you know, consume the size relevance of that font size. So naturally the heading will get smaller, and the amount of space below it will also naturally get smaller and keep that equal proportion, right? So it's very flexible without having to like add a spacing utility at every single breakpoint.
Are you talking about rems or M's?
M's. EM. So like right here, EM, right? So M is a unit that is relative to, you know, the thing itself or a parent, and the font size of the thing itself or its parent, right?
Where am I seeing that on the style, on the CSS on the right?
Yeah. So if I, you know, I add a U,
there it is, right there.
3 right here, right? So MB standing for margin bottom, and then 3 standing for 3M. Julio?
Why did you switch from rems to M's? I think you just explained that, but I wasn't tracking.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen both though, right? I saw a couple of rems in there.
Yeah, we use units as they're intended, you know, like further benefit of strategy. And so rem, for example, is, you know, base font sizes, and rem will always respect the HTML level size. So if I increase my default font size in the browser on any website, it will respect that and increase as well, right? But M is, you know, again, specific to like the font size of the thing itself or its parent, and not necessarily the HTML. So you have much more control and like strategically using that to let things scale and change and whatever, right? Like, has anybody seen, you know, like fluid responsive or some of these approaches that like, again, client first has like the fluid design generator, right? So the idea behind this is that if you want your site to like get to a certain size, and then literally everything, UI and all, just proportionally scales as the browser gets bigger, that's all doing so either with JavaScript or by setting almost everything to M based and then adjusting the body or HTML font size either via like VW or again with JavaScript by manipulating it. And so then that way everything scales proportionally, right? So like that's maybe an example where M is used at scale. I'm not a fan of fluid responsive personally. Like I don't, especially when it, you know, scales and gets small, and then like, you know, what should be 16 pixel font is like now 10 is the main reason I don't like it, but yeah.
So you use rem for typography and you use M for spacing.
Yes, totally.
Okay.
Yep. That's the main gist of it. But hopefully that makes sense in the way I tried to explain it too, on why we do that. It's not just the fact that like we were like eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you know, like there's a very clear reason.
I took all your smart things and I was like, okay, so.
And then I think the thing even to note too, is that like, then if you don't, you know, if you're not using it, like if you're using it on, if I had another card here, right? And I was using it on this card, then it's essentially the same thing as pixels, because now it's just based on again, I don't have a font size set on this card. It's going all the way up to the body, right? So it's just 16 pixels times 3 is, you know, what even is that? 32, 40, 48? Yeah. So it's like, it's then has that equivalent value, and, you know, is one of those things that, at least for me, I haven't found a lot of really common reasons where I need to adjust these at every breakpoint. So that's why you won't see individual breakpoint versions of these, but you can absolutely create them. And like an example of doing that would just be U-SM-MB-0 or 1 or whatever, right? And you would just duplicate it here, create it like we did with the styles, the type styles, right? So we have the same thing here with padding. Candidly, I use margin most of the time, but they're, without getting, again, too nerdy, there's like 2 camps of spacing. There's, I think it's intrinsic and extrinsic, and some people prefer padding for everything. Some people prefer margin. I'm in the margin camp, but padding's here if you use it, right? Even though I don't, some people might. And that's,
there's a literal difference. Like
there is,
right? Like you should use padding for some things, and then you should use margin for other things.
I think.
And people are saying, no, just use one or the other.
The way that I understand the differences is, oh, it just did the thing again. It did the thing, y'all. What is the thing? Okay. Without getting too deep into it, if I added 2 bottom M, okay?
Yeah.
And then on this one, I added 2 top. Nothing happens. It's not 4. Why the heck is it not 4? That's because margin does not like represent, or, and I'm probably going to say this incorrectly because of the specific terminology, but margin does not respect the box shape, the border box, I think is what it's referred to as, of the element. Yep. Whereas padding does. If I do PT like that and PB, I got 4, okay? And so that is like one of the most common examples of the difference, you know, and people that love the intrinsic model, which is padding, just prefer that mindset that every single time I add space, I want to know it's that exact space. And candidly, like, I don't really have that great a reason why I love extrinsic or margin. I just have always used it. And so I think, you know, like, as sad of an excuse that is, that's just what I'm used to. But, you know, padding's there too.
I love that there's 2 camps. Like there's a thing that is a thing that has 2 camps.
Yo,
is it an aggressive one? How hard do people fight?
I know, it's like they've got t-shirts, team intrinsic.
And Twitter that we aren't familiar with yet.
The opinions in CSS of all frameworks, I think, maybe not JavaScript, because JavaScript's like so broad across, you know, like all React and Vue and all those things, but CSS goes hard, yo. It goes, I don't know, it's nuts, the opinions that go in there. Like, especially Max and I did a lot of reading of like other frameworks in this process, and even like talk to other people like, oh, Ben's here. Ben, thank you. All right, I'm just gonna stop talking and let Ben jump in, because Ben is the true wizard here. I just wish I was Ben most days.
Don't worry, Ben arrived right at the beginning.
Yeah.
So he's the whole thing. Don't worry.
Thank you, Ben, for that was the phrase I was looking for, collapsing margins, right? And also another Webflower like Ben, I was going to mention Matthew Munger, who is just an absolute wizard. And I'll try to not get into the fact that like his own framework he's building is just so hardcore. It's mind-blowing. And he was the one that was kind of like really telling me a lot more recently about all these different camps and methods. And like, do I even have the history up anymore? I probably don't. Yeah, there was other ones. I don't need to get into it. We'll keep going. But yes, there's lots of opinions is the TLDR. So other sections and utilities, alignment, overflow, display, you know, like display none is a common one. Position relative, because you want to tack it onto something and then something within it you want to absolutely adjust. You know, that's a really common one. Setting height and width to 100% specifically, because if you need other sizes, usually you can use the column system to do that. Unless it's like on a really small, you know, micro UI scale, then custom classes is usually the name of the game. And then helpers is like, we struggle with the name of this one, but I think helpers was the best we could like think of that made sense. These are all a little more specific. They have very specific use cases that, again, we find very common and helpful, and hope others will too. Some quick examples of them is like border is kind of like it sounds. It's a border that is just 100% width, 1 pixel. And then I can tack on other stuff. Like I have a BG gray there, right? And then I could do like MB2. And now I have this like, oh, where'd my, again, live demos are the best. I don't know where UBG gray is, but let's find another one. Black, and then 2. Maybe I deleted that one and it didn't get cleared. I don't know, but there's the point. You get a quick border. You can tack, margin padding above, below, whatever to adjust and use it around. Other things are, like image cover is like full cover within an absolute shell. So something like aspect ratio 1 or 1:1, which is, square aspect ratio. So like it will just scale proportionally as the width changes. Link overlay. Sorry, I'm going into all of them. Dang it.
Question.
Yeah.
So you're one of the other things that I've heard some other frameworks, which I shall not name, or which I already have named several times. It's one framework that I've been using. They talk about like once you hit 3 classes, don't try to go to 4 classes.
Yeah.
Once you go to 4 classes, then you should just make a custom class.
Totally.
And it looks like what you're doing here is you're in situations where you're adding 4 classes. Maybe, I don't know how, do you have an opinion on that?
Dude, yes. And the opinion is vague. We also say 4 classes in the docs, and I would say that is a great rule of thumb. But something we have all the way, I think, Max, isn't it up here at the top somewhere? Somewhere we explain the fact that like, how do we put it? It's like every rule is meant to be broken until it's not, right? I can't remember where we have it. We have it written much more eloquently. And the point is exactly, especially in this realm, where like the other reason we reference developer first is like, there are situations like this that like, candidly, I just don't think there's like the perfect knife cutting answer to hard say 4 and never more kind of thing. Our guideline is 4, but absolutely there may be cases where you can tack on 5 because it makes sense still, right? The main thing that I think that guideline is there for is I was just let's just get into the column system before we're even there. So if I'm just gonna like quickly build before even explaining this, build a like little card in a column thing here, right? Kyle, you're like looking back.
I'm watching. I'm like,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to do this quick. Frick, now what did I just think of? Oh, okay, yeah. So a card, right? So like a card itself, or even the body element that we have separately here. This is gonna drive me nuts. Why did I add a heading? Let's just do a paragraph so we can see what's going on. So, and I'm sorry, y'all. I'm just like, I can't help myself. Okay, now we can see a card. So I could just do oh my gosh, P1, UP1. And then I'd be like, no, I also want like margin bottom 2. And I want like, actually in here, we're going to do BG black and we're going to do text white. Like once you get to this point and you're just like adding on all these utilities to create some very explicitly custom element, like a card that is probably going to be reused all across the site, that is kind of one of those thresholds where it's like, hey, it might just make more sense to just do a custom class here, because a lot of adding those specific elements just makes more sense to do it custom, right? Another example of this general concept is, if I put this back, card body, on my card in general, right? So this is in a way a custom class, or the way we refer to them as like even base classes, like the section and container in them are kind of thought of as base classes, because base classes our documentation at least states is like you can use either utilities or combo classes on them. Fair game, whatever you want to do. But if you're using custom classes, so instead, if I was like cool trick card,
it should be U dash cool trick cards.
No, this is a custom class. You're wrong. And I want this to be this color, and we're gonna give it some like just epic blur or something, then I'm not gonna go do this, right? So if I already have this custom class, then I'm giving these very specific parameters. We don't recommend that you add utilities to them as well. Just use, if you wanted, what did I add there? 2. If you wanted 2 and bottom, just add it to the custom class. because more than likely, again, this is just speaking from a place of building a lot of sites. More than likely, the client will come back, like we talked about earlier, and like, hey, can you actually make that bottom margin on all those cool trick cards 1M? And I'll be like, sure, client, it's done, right? Instead of now having to go to every place in the site to change it, right? So like that is, I realize, a nuance and almost a like fine line to draw. It's not as clear cut, but like that's the nuance with using custom and utility classes, is you want to like have a clear reason to use them as just something to tack on quick or not, right?
Okay, so you've got one column here that looks like it's a third, so 4 of the 12, I assume.
Yep.
Okay, so if you were to make 2 more columns to fill that out.
Hold on, let me fix my eyes from bleeding here. Okay, so we got our card in it, we got our card body, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So if I wanted more columns, copy paste. Right?
So now show me your DOM.
Yeah.
So you've got, okay, so row, column, so you aside from maybe your page wrapper or your section that this is in, did you go section straight into your row?
No, always a container first, right? And then never matching them together. So like section, container, if you just need some stuff straight in that container, do it, and then a row and columns, right? Sorry, I just jumped up.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I see you're using the section element.
Yeah, that one is like, you don't necessarily have to use the section element. The most important thing here is that you make it an actual section, which we just need to, Webflow just needs to fix that. Like if I add a section, please just default it to section.
Are there any Webflow employees on the line?
Yeah,
can we get a message somewhere that we'd love to be able to change the default width of a section? That'd be great.
We've actually started this section, piece with the engineering team earlier this week, and I know there's some conversations happening around it. So hopefully, when you add a section, you don't have to set section anymore.
We can say
I thought you were going to give me and there's a lot more to it than just changing the width, which is like always the thing. It's like, you think that it would be very easy to just be able to, but there's a lot more to it than that. And so I was anticipating that, but it's good to hear that there's actually maybe some light at the end of this very dark tunnel.
Ben's face says it all. We can say this: if you've been in and around the Webflow community in the last 2 weeks, there's definitely been some like finally progress on just like some quality of life, awesome stuff, and I just feel like we're getting some momentum, and I'm stoked. I'll leave it.
Can we get a?
All right, stop dropping these.
Stop it! Keep the wish list stuff to a minimum, please.
I was going to say, can we get a round of applause for wrapping elements in a div?
Yeah. Okay. I thought
Did you see it came out and it was like, oh, this is great wrapping elements in div, and then immediately people were like, but I want to wrap multiple elements.
Oh yeah. That's
like a normal thing. When I started at Webflow, I was working at support, and I remember we launched e-commerce, and it was like a huge effort, and people had worked like all these extra hours and put blood, sweat, and tears into it. When we released it, and people were like, I want it to be on par with Shopify, like the very first day. And it was like, oh man, can we breathe for a second?
Yep. I see. That's what I thought you were going to do, Kyle, is be like, but I want this and this and this and this. Like, I hear you, brother. We all want it. But
I hear you, but no.
Yeah, but no, yes, we're gonna get that yes rhythm going. We're gonna get it.
That's
okay.
a good question then, because I have a custom class question that's sitting in my brain, and some of this might be based on my slightly limited understanding of the terminology, but I'm thinking if the custom class is something that is encapsulating a very specific nugget versus that has various styles integrated in it, does that mean that MAST as a templated system doesn't technically have any?
Any custom styles? Is that what you're saying? Any custom styles?
Yeah, like
so say that you have custom classes used in this. I'm just wondering if I've understood so far what they represent.
I think I get you. Like, so the base style guide, I would say no. Like the only thing that I would say is even in that realm of what I would consider custom class is like the card here. And even then, we're at least labeling it in the docs as a base class. So it's in the same realm as a column and a row and a container and a section, where those are things that are just like a button or a form input. Like it's I'm pretty confident you'll probably have a site that needs a card in one shape or form or another. And so beyond that, everything in here should just be base classes or utility classes. And when I say things like base and utility, definitely check out the docs. This, again, I think was one of those categories that is in fundamentals right here, class types, that we had a lot of conversations about. And I talked to genius people like Ben about like, how do you build, or what systems have you used, or whatever. And again, read a lot of other docs of other frameworks. And then, yeah, this was kind of one of the ways we tried to structure it, show some examples of what are in each of those and why you would use one or how they're different than others. So yeah, definitely read that out. But I think, yeah, in general, it doesn't start with any, but maybe also part of your question is like, we absolutely encourage custom classes, right? So when I showed the example of, creating the cool trick card, but if I could have tried to create it with all utilities, like I think that's the threshold of any way that I've seen teams, like the brand team on at Webflow, or when I've worked with teams previously or as a freelancer. The hardest thing to get usually is that threshold of like, when should I use a custom class, or when should I just stack on a bunch of utilities? And so I wish I had like a better, again, it's just like when the barometer hits 10, then flip, but it's like, it can be more nuanced. And I think the main thing to keep in mind is that utilities are, like, candidly, I wanted to call maybe even the whole thing helpers, right? They're all kind of helpers, like this states, because they're meant to just be like quick things to add on when you need them, right? Instead of just this thing that stacks on a ton, except, again, there's always exceptions. Man, I wish I could think of how we read that. Like every rule has an exception or something like that, except for when you do things like columns, right? Or like what we're going to do here, to Kyle's question earlier, like what about stacking multiple? It's like, well, if you want to adjust a column within the column system at every single breakpoint, you will naturally have 5 or more, but that's okay because they're part of this base system, right? They're not necessarily a one-off utility like the rest of the utility classes. So maybe that's a good segue to column system. Do y'all want to jam on that, or any other questions?
Kyle asked about the columns so long ago.
Yeah. So I often run into situations where I'll have like a container and I will want that in one scenario. I'm like, oh, this container, I want these things to be side by side. So I flex, I horizontal, align left, whatever, but I'm basically flex horizontal. And then I get to a point where like, for whatever reason, I've got this container and now it's a different instance of it and I need it to be vertical. How would you do, is there like a combo class or something that you're putting on to determine your flex box alignments in MAST?
So that
getting very, very opinionated in the chat.
I love opinions. Hold on. Yes, not on the container. That's basically what I was going to say, is like, so this is where I think a good inspiration, honestly, is what I mentioned at the very beginning about like what I'm looking at right here. We just have a section and a container, like bread and butter. Client first has, I think it's section, and then like body padding, and then margin padding, and then like 4 elements. And however, like, although I don't agree with that specific use case, I definitely think there's a lot to be said about just splitting utilities across multiple elements, right? Like for your use case, don't tack it on the container. Instead, within the container, like if I just go all the way up to, again, we have our section here in our container, then just add a div and do what you need to do on this div as your column orient, right? So like, if we just go ahead and get into this, right? So if I need left, right columns, especially if it's like full layouts, and again, not like micro tiny little avatar UI or something, then this is where the idea is that the column system is meant to, solve for, I would say, 80% of your layouts of most sites, unless you're building like some radical host or site, right? And there's always going to be that 20% of even your use case of going from horizontal to vertical, and it's like the same components and things. That honestly might be a use case for a custom class, because you have this very specific need to go on the exact same spacing and gap and then go from horizontal to vertical, right? Whereas like the column system, and let me put a div in here just so you can like see it, right? And so we have a call, we have, again, sorry, our row wrapper, and then you always have a call, and then every call you define at each breakpoint how many columns out of 12 you want this to be. And you define that for each column. This is, again, a very difference between, candidly, the boilerplate system we use at Webflow, on the brand team uses Grid, CSS Grid for our layout system.
Oh, wow.
And I have regrets. We'll just leave it at that. I have regrets. And I think a lot of it is this, where in CSS Grid, you can technically manipulate individual columns, but in Webflow, when you do it, it starts just generating CSS in the background to do that. That is not specifically always tied to a class. So you don't have as much finite control over it as you do with something like this. And so, yes, that's my quick spiel on why Flexbox versus Grid.
So you don't have like a combo class that's indicating flex, like the flex
That's the row.
direct.
Yep.
So
Yep.
row is always flex horizontal, as then the column always flex vertical.
No, the column is just block, because it's out of this mindset of we don't want to over style, right? We want it to be, again, as lightweight, as simplified as humanly possible. And so if you want flex vertical within this, then do that in a custom class, or like out of the box, there is like a deflex, right? For just simple use cases of like, I just need this div, this div next to this div for whatever reason, like very, very basic. But if you want, a vertical, like you could do a combo class on that that's specifically for this utility. Or you could just do a custom class, right? Again, for a explicit use case. I will say, however, the one thing that is nice about the CSS Grid approach we use on Boilerplate is we actually do sometimes, but I would say it's in the 10% or less range. We'll use it vertically, where we'll set a grid and set it to one column and then set a gap of 40 pixels or something. And then you can use it as like a vertical spacer. But like for me, if I was doing it with this system instead, like say I want like a list, a vertical list in here, right? Maybe no bullets, then I'm just going to do spacing vertically like this, right? I'm just going to tack on some utilities. And then maybe this last one, I'm going to add on 0 because I don't want any on the last one. And that would be my vertical stack. I don't necessarily need to use Flexbox. I can get away with block because by default block, is vertical.
Look
Does that
at
make
you.
sense?
You would use like you'd pull out a list and do a list like that.
Yes. So this is another accessibility thing that
it is, isn't it?
Yeah, list elements can be used without bullets so that when a screen reader comes upon him, it will read out list X amount of items. In this case, it'll say list 3 items, and then it'll go through item 1, and then read out all the content in the item, and item 2. So like really anywhere that you have like what could be represented as a list, you should use a list element. One of many things people don't often do, I will say. So don't sweat it if you don't, right? So anyways.
No, I remember I was building for my company, we redid our website, and I went through and like I made it all and it was great. And I was trying to be really conscious of accessibility. And then we did a talk here, I think, on accessibility. And then I was like, wow, I missed a lot of things. And I went back and I had all these things that were like, they weren't lists, but they were lists. And so I redid everything as lists. And it probably took me a few hours to go through the whole site and change everything. But it was, I was committed to, I was like, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Right.
Props.
But I like, it was one of those things I did it once. And then I to be honest, I don't like actually build a lot of new sites in Webflow. Like I don't take on a lot of new clients. And so it's one of those things where it's like, if it's not muscle memory and you're not, I should just use this as a list. You don't remember or think about it. But.
Yeah, totally.
And Corey.
Sorry, go on, Penny.
So what if I worked with Foundation for a long, long time, which was basically came out right around the same time as Bootstrap.
Yep.
And so I understand sort of the concept of this, but what if you wanted a column that's narrow, but in the middle of your row?
Love it.
In Foundation, it was offset X number of columns. So how do you do that?
So I think, and I'll do it at the container level, but you could do this within a column as well, right? So like an example is, you can use rows and columns within rows and columns all you want. But the reason I raised my hand out of excitement was another super common thing I use this with is, how sometimes you just want a narrower container, right? I would say the more common example with this, you could do, CC I don't know, max 900 or something like that, if you wanted it to explicitly be fixed to that max width. However, if you just want a narrower fluid column, you can use row and column for that too, because row I can add modifiers to that will adjust justification or alignment, right? So justification being sent horizontal, right? So then if I add a call, oh wait, I did between, didn't I? Sorry, justify center, then, you know, that will center the column. And so now I can do like call, I cannot type tonight, yo, LG 10, right? And so LG meaning desktop size, I want it to be 10 out of 12. And so now I've just created a fluid centered content with the same exact system that I'm using to create a simple side-by-side, right? And so I use this all the time, yo, like even my own portfolio site, you know, here you can see this kind of full edge layout, and then things come in here. This is just LG 11, right? And you can see this on the MAST landing page. You can check out the back end of my portfolio site if you want to see how it's built. And so, you know, then I come back out to 12, you know, and then even in here, this spacing, I'm using a column to bump it in, and then a custom combo class, or just not a custom combo class. I think it's just a combo class to add that extra padding to create this like card-like effect, right? So it's super flexible in that way. And honestly, this is another one of those things that with CSS Grid, at least in Webflow, big asterisk, it's not very easy to do that within a system, right? Like you end up dragging things and generating CSS without even knowing it. And this way you can do that totally easily, right? And so another thing, maybe even in the realm of Penny's question, is people are always like, well, I want like a bigger gap here. Like 40 pixels is too tight. And the initial thought is that if you want, this amount of gap is intended to be a default. So if by default, your design should always have tighter or wider gaps always, then you can just adjust the base column to whatever you want, and then just make sure that you go back up to the row and adjust the offset back the same way, right? Because the negative margin, I feel like, is even an old school. I mean, it goes back to like the Bootstrap Foundation days of offsetting before things like Grid even existed and before Flexbox existed, right? This was just like float columns. So yeah, there's that. You could set the base. And then the other, I would say, more common thing, because again, built a lot of sites. Later. Thank you.
Great job.
Appreciate you. So the other thing that I do all the time, and I've never really had to adjust that base, is I'll do a row between, right? So the modifier of like, I just want to set columns out to the side. And then I'm going to do something like, maybe on this side, we want it to be 5. And this side, we want it to be 7. Oh, sorry, that's 12. We want it to be 6, right? And so now, just like that, I have a 1 column gap created. And the best part is that now I can easily manipulate. I can say, nope, now on MD, I want to go and just, I don't need that big gap because I need more room for my content, right? So like, okay, that looks good. And then maybe here, we're like, all right, now this has got to go to 12, right? Just full width.
Oh, you're adding classes as you go down the viewport,
right? And so a couple things to note here. One is, see how I went from LG to SM. You do not have to do it at every breakpoint. You only do it when you need. And so again, it becomes efficient that way. And then the biggest thing is that after you get used to this, and this is, if you remember in my little pitch deck, I mentioned human error. And this is where, like, I think is the biggest benefit of human error, is that I can build layouts with a pretty high degree of confidence, and I hardly have to adjust stuff responsively. Like I'll just like, drop in oh my gosh, sorry, I just hit Command R, just killed it. I was just gonna say, like, I'll drop in some rich text, and maybe we'll do our little aspect here, and an image and image cover. And I think I have just like a placeholder image in here. Cool. Sweet. I have a layout. I know that I want that gap. Maybe I also want this to be row, align, center, so I can center them. And then something else to note there is you notice that, like, when I typed that in originally, let me undo. I'll type in row, align, and it's like, oh, there's no combo class. We've gotten this question a couple times now. with calls as well. So this is a Webflow thing that we can't really help, is like Webflow selector search isn't smart enough to know that actually there is a combo class of row that is row align center. That exists, it just doesn't know it. So this is where like, just know that if you type it right and it is there, it will work as expected, right? And that's no different with like, if I back out of this, and then this is the other thing too, that this is like, there is an illusion that like, you know, now when I go to call, what did I have in there? If I go here, it's like, oh, existing combo classes. So it's saying that these are combo classes. In other words, they are like combined, merged in the rendered CSS. They are not. They are only existing as call and then the explicit thing here. If you go down here where it like states, you know, grid desktop, grid tablet, like this is where all these classes are actually set so that they exist. And so they're all based at the call level. And then Webflow is just like, again, not really, I don't want to say not smart enough because Webflow is very smart, but like it doesn't know that correlation between those things, right? So like when I go here to clear these classes, it says it's cleaning up things, but the actual produce CSS on the back end, if you just stick to these column and rows, it's 66 classes if I didn't count wrong. And you know, you can build 80% of your site from those 66 classes, where if you think about like client first and other things, that everything is essentially a custom class in some base or another, like specifically client first. Again, I don't mean to call them out, but it's like there is no layout system in client first. And so every time you make columns or something, unless you are very strategic about reusing those, you are just making more and more and more and more CSS. So at scale, it's going to get bloated, right? At small sites, it's fine, but big sites, I wouldn't recommend.
So one of the things that client first recommends is like name your sections even if you're not doing anything to that section. So you can look down on the DOM on the left and you can understand what is going on. And if I'm understanding you correctly, you're basically saying you're making a class that has nothing in it, which is just adding bloat.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, like that example explicitly, I think I have far less, I don't have much against, because like what it's generating is tiny, right? Like it's like a line of CSS for each one of those. And in fact, like, I don't know if I've ever actually checked that if you don't give it styles, I'm not sure if Webflow actually outputs it to the CSS file. Something to look into. My general opinion on that topic is, can't I just scroll the page and click on it? And then, you know, like, then I'm there. I don't know. I think that's the thing. I see the benefit. I've just never really felt like it made that much of a difference for me. Right.
Okay.
So anyways, what I was going to show here is, you know, it'll suggest other classes that you've already added as combos, which sometimes is handy because you'll end up using the same patterns across sites or across pages. But if I type in, you know, maybe MD something different 3, again, it's like, oh, no combo. Sorry, Webflow, there's a combo. I promise you. Now it's 3 columns, right? And so something to keep in mind. Again, to me, I think maybe it's out of bias of using this for so long. I don't really think twice about it anymore because, like, as you've seen me working, even probably, like, I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts, you know, so I'm just constantly adding things by doing Command Enter, typing, Command Enter, typing, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
What are the rakes that people step on here? What are the most common rakes that people step on that prevent them from learning it or using it wrong?
I think with the columns and rows, the most common one that I see is, again, getting a little too hasty with additional utilities on these. Like, you can do it, it's really okay. And an example that I do sometimes is, we'll have, like, imagine, I'm trying to think of a site that even has it, where there's like a heading and then maybe some buttons for like a slider off to the side, right? So imagine, you know, here's my H2 and imagine there's a slider below it, slider title, right? And then over here, so I have a column over here, we're just gonna have a div. And for the sake of example, I'm just gonna do column shrink. So this is another utility you can use within the system that will just, as it sounds, shrink the column to the width of its elements, right? So maybe I have a button in here, for example. And And then now I just want these to be like aligned on the bottom. So this way, if this slider title oh my gosh, is very long, right? And I don't want those, like, line. I want them nice and tidy along the bottom. And so again, I'm going to do justify between, and then aligns row, align bottom. Where's it end? See, I don't even know my own thing, yo. End. And then now I'm like, okay, I'm going to use my utility to remove my spacing for this use case. And then right off the bat, it's pretty much there. But maybe, I want to just zero that out so everything's nice and tight. And so I could do like MB0 on these, right? That's totally fine, right? Or inversely, you might want extra spacing below each column. And so you could add like MB3 or something on there. Totally fine. However, what I see people start to do is then they're like, BG, again, they just go nuts and they're like BG black and text white and just start like tacking, right? And this goes back to that concept of like, think about the concepts and what they're used for and separate them strategically with elements. So for this explicit use case, I would instead just add a div within here that has BG black and text white, and then I would just drop this in here, right? And so now, I've separated those so they're more modular. I can now move this around with this color change as I please. And I don't have the risk of affecting the columns, right? Because here's the other risk that comes with it is like a common thing I see is that when you tack things together like this, even let's just use this example. I'll get down here and then somebody will be like, oh no, you know what? I actually do want that spacing. I'm just going to do this. What I just did there has now combined. Yeah, you might as well this is going to be way dramatic, but let's make a point. You might as well just threw a grenade in the perfectly stacked Lego brick pile of utilities, right? Because again, way dramatic. It doesn't actually matter. What matters is that Webflow now will have combined, I don't remember if the CSS preview shows this accurately. Yes. Webflow has now combined this explicit combination of classes to have CSS of 36 pixels bottom, right? And so it's not the end of the world. No one's going to die if you do this. No actual grenade will go off. But what will happen is some other, again, think about the next person, y'all. Just like, oh my gosh, again, have a little empathy. The next person's going to come along. They're going to add that exact same combination of things. And they're not going to expect that all of a sudden I added MB0 and now there's 36 pixels out of nowhere, right? Like they're not going to know.
And you would have done that with another class.
If I wanted that change to happen?
If you wanted the 36 pixels below or whatever it is. And I understand you did margin bottom 0, but.
Right. So if I wanted that to happen, I can't even undo now. LOL. Sorry, Derek. Don't mean to make you laugh. And so yes, if I wanted to have that specific thing happen for me, this is how I would approach it. Because again, I don't often use margin utilities on other breakpoints. Like I just don't find that useful because usually the use case when I need to is explicit to something, right? So what I would do for this fake example is I'd be like, because especially for this, if it was a slider, I'd have custom classes for the slider below for sure. Because the slider more than likely is using Swiper or some JavaScript library, because let's be honest, the native Webflow slider kind of sucks. And so I'm using some custom classes anyways. Small dig. So I would do something like slider _ title wrapper, even if the only purpose of this custom class is, and actually better yet, it wouldn't be the only purpose because I got some color tweaking that I'm doing, y'all. So no, instead, I'm not even going to use those utilities now. I'm going to do background black, text white, and then I don't have to worry about spacing on the column anymore because now when I get down to here and I want spacing, oh wait, that's on. Oh,
you're just you're putting another div in there.
Yeah, put another div in there again. And so now I can do whatever I want. I could do 100. We're going to do it 131.31458. That's the exact margin I want. And so I'm going to do it on a custom class. I'm not going to try to force it upon the utilities and the structure that's there, right? Like, again, hopefully this makes sense. I like so many great questions and use cases here. This is probably one of my favorite demos I've done so far, because there's so many of these things that I don't know how to express it other than nuances, right? And maybe there's a system that has perfected all of these. This is just the way that I've found over the years is like a best way to still have the full flexibility of using a custom class with freedom when I want. Kind of like, again, Client First does a great job explaining that. But also still using layout systems and things for that 80% of use cases, right?
It sounds like what you're saying is almost is like use your utility classes. And then once you get to a point where you're like, is this a little too much? I want to do something custom. Don't worry about like, if Client First FinSuite has that great tool where you can like merge your combo class, all your classes together and make a custom class.
Mm-hmm.
But you're almost saying, just put another div in there and then apply some styles to that div.
Yeah.
And now you're getting both, but you've separated them out.
Yeah. I thought what you were going to say too is like, use all the tools you have until you can't, and then use a custom class and do your thing, style it however you need to style it to get the job done, right? Like, again, back to the general store hardware vibes, like get the job done, y'all.
I want to know who this person is on a team that has a meltdown every time they see all these excess classes. Is it just you, Corey? Are you just like trying to...
Guilty, super guilty, super guilty.
Think of the next person, think of me.
Yeah. Here's where it comes from though. It's like I've jumped into projects for the first time, and what I said earlier, I've literally seen like 1,700 unused classes in a project. And then I went and tried to create 2 columns, because surely if there's 1,700 unused classes, there's probably 4,000 used. So surely there's a 2-column class out there, and then there's like 7 different ways that 2 columns have been created. And it's just a feeling.
But you have to know and pick the right way.
Guess what? I tried every single of those 7 2-column options until I found one that was close. And then guess what? It still wasn't right, because it's like, and here's the thing is like, sometimes people position all of this as like, it's just a developer thing. I see it so differently. Yes, it's a developer tool, but it's also how good design it comes to be. Good design is consistency. Good design is balance. Good design is like structure, right? Like, and all those things don't only help you work quicker, but like you actually have a better end result, because like those columns and separations and gaps are exact everywhere. And you didn't even have to think twice about doing it, because it's just innate in the system and tools you're using, right? So it's like, again, gets meta, but like these are all the things that, keep me up at night about people tacking on extra classes.
To take your house building metaphor further.
Yes. Love. Oh, I'm a metaphor junkie.
Your studs are always the same number of inches apart.
Yep.
Right.
Is it 36 on center? 48 on
16.
center? I don't know. Something like that.
I thought it was like 18.
16.
But I don't.
Oh, is it 18? Maybe it is.
I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, you're right. You're
Penny,
super right.
I know. They do it. They might do it differently in Canada. You never know.
They do.
We like to do things really weird here. I don't know if you've heard of the imperial system, but
Yes.
So
I actually have one more question. So we know that CSS bloat is bad. We know why CSS bloat is bad, because it slows down the site. It makes things heavy when the browser's loading everything up, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
What's the point where it becomes noticeable? Have you been on a site that's slow, cleaned the CSS up, and found that was the differentiating factor?
ooh,
Best
this is
questions.
you have gotten to the heart of it, because the sticklers like Corey who say, I can't stand any classes. I'm curious to see if he's ever seen a site that's actually been impacted by too much CSS.
So here's the thing. Again, such a good question.
No.
Thank you. Here's the thing is I've actually, I swear at one point in the further past, I found a great article comparing browser performance between CSS and JavaScript. If anybody finds something that's like explicitly comparing those on real rates, the thing that I've always learned, at least we'll put it on that, is that CSS absolutely is processed at like, I want to say twice the speed as JavaScript, right?
Yes.
And the reason I'm comparing those is JavaScript is a really commonly known thing that like you have a ton of JavaScript that is always, aside from massive images, is like always a reason sites are slow, right? CSS absolutely is more performant And I would say, like, especially because of things Webflow does, minifying and certain backend things that happen, like, yeah, like it would be a huge site before you see a noticeable difference on the live site. However, in the actual designer experience, one of the known reasons for the designer experience being slow, if you've worked in a big site in Webflow, is a massive amount of classes. And the reason is because every time Webflow loads up, this little panel right here is going to render all of them classes. And boy almighty, there can be a lot, right?
Will it clean up the publish speed?
I was going to ask.
Yes,
Yeah.
like ultimately, yes. Like it's
You sold me. I'm in.
Again, here's the thing. I'm going to say this. FinSuite, anybody, if you're listening, I love you. I really do. I just want to express, things that I've heard. And so like FinSuite's had a great stream about this, right? Like when they launched Client First, I think it was talking about, CSS bloat, and then it really doesn't matter because like, what is the difference between a 30 kilobyte file and a 90 kilobyte file? It's almost indistinguishable to the modern internet connection, but not everybody's A on a modern internet connection. And B is like, they're ultimately at the end of the day, again, from the very like earlier things I was showing, like if you want it to be as light and clean as possible, CSS is a big factor in that, right? And so it's like, to me, irresponsible to just like say there's no rules, dump on whatever files and CSS you want, because it's not just about performance, it's also about maintainability, right? And that like if you have just an unwieldy amount of classes and all of a sudden you want to start using one or find that magic 2 column that I mentioned, like it's also about that, right? So I don't mean to like talk around it, because like, again, yes, if you had a massive amount versus a tiny amount, you would notice a difference. But like at the end of the day, it's not like a huge live site difference. The thing I was going to pull up, where do I have it? That I did not publicly show, but we'll show it here because this is what I do. I always show you all behind the scenes of stuff. Something that I did not publish was this. And I didn't even end up taking the time to do system flow, but I did like a comparison chart of like the numbers. The only thing we show publicly is like the size of the base CSS file of MAST, which is 33 kilobytes, technically a kilobyte larger than Client First. So props Client First. However, Client First does not have a layout system of 66 classes that again, then are flexible across multiple things. So to be only a kilobyte bigger and actually less lines of CSS and negligibly be more flexible, there's this like something to consider. And then when you get really hardcore, I mean, look at this difference, like 92 kilobytes and 6,000 lines in Knockout. Let me be clear, huge fan of Edgar Allan and Knockout and all that they're doing. I would, the way I would position, especially these 3 frameworks is like, if you're a beginner, use Client First. If you want to kind of bleed into pro, you kind of do big sites, small sites, you want to work quickly, I think MAST is the best. Of course, I'm biased. If you're building like next gen enterprise, like going to the moon websites, Knockout is probably your system, because like, honestly, Edgar Allan's been building it for like 8-10 years or something absurd. And they have like really put a lot of thought and intention into it. And if you read through the docs, I think it shows, because there's like a lot of like, honestly, like meta level hardcore strategy that goes into it. And so I still think it's a great system, and it uses a layout system, which is like, again, one of my biggest beasts with Client First is that there is no layout system. So,
but hold on.
Yeah.
You're saying if you're building the big sites, you're going to the moon, you're doing enterprise
great
stuff.
question. Great
Use
question.
Knockout, but now enterprise.
Yeah. So here's the difference.
Times as big.
Here's the difference is that Knockout is much more of a utility first framework. So it's much closer to something like Tailwind. If you haven't heard of Tailwind, the approach with Tailwind, hopefully that's kind of clear here, is like you basically build almost entirely with utility classes. So there is almost no custom classes. Everything is just like, tacking on, like, remember I did with the card, it's like, I want 1 M padding, 1 margin bottom, black background, white text. That is a utility first approach. And Knockout is that. And so I would say the comparison here is that although it's big out the gate, that's on purpose, because it has like everything thing you could ever need in terms of layouts. And so more than likely you could build a massive go to the moon website and it would be at like 8,000 lines instead of 6,000. Whereas like candidly, MAST for like a really, really huge site, you know, you might end up having a good number of custom classes because of the nuances we were talking about, right? And so like, although personally, I would of course still use MAST because I'm used to it and I've used it forever. I do still think there's a place for things like Knockout and utility frameworks when you really just want to have that mindset or even just that personal preference of how you build, right? Like to me, it's absolutely ludicrous that Tailwind has gotten so popular because like, I would equate it to inline CSS, you know, like if anybody's, you know, done email design and you have to, it's so painful and manual, but the purpose of it and why it's gotten popular, to my limited understanding at least, is because I'm not a React developer, is that JavaScript frameworks and people that build with them don't often know CSS super well and always are frustrated with it. And they just want this very declarative, explicit way to just tack on these things and not even have to touch styles. They're all they're doing is just adding classes and that's it. They're never touching CSS. And so this is very powerful and fast for them to do so. And then they don't have to worry about the rest of it because they're using things like compilers and static site generators and things that, you know, the machines just handle for them, which is like epic because ultimately Webflow is doing a lot of that stuff for us under the hood. We just don't have to worry about it, setting it up. So, so anyways, sorry, getting super nerdy, but yeah.
We love it.
So do you, given the row and column thing, do you use grid very much?
Not very often. There's absolutely use cases like No-Code Supply Co. Let's look under the hood because then it's just more real. You can see it, of course, on the outside, but the grid with No-Code Supply Co. And let me zoom out because I have my screen kind of like zoomed in a little bit. Wow, can I do like 60%? So the grid in here is unique, right? Like intentionally, that was by design. And in order to do it, I used grid, like, and it's using a specific setting in grid, which candidly isn't the best for accessibility because it kind of adjusts the tab order in an unexpected way sometimes. But this dense option will like force cells together. You just can't do this very elegantly with Flexbox, right? So absolutely, I think there's a place for grid for use cases like this, or honestly, again, if you have like a custom class circumstance where grid makes sense, go for it, right? Or if you have like some other, again, especially I mentioned a couple times like micro UI, right? Like even within these card elements here, right? Like I'm using custom classes in a lot of these because like I want to like, look at this. I want to very finitely control these things like 4 pixels, you know, like, and so that's fine. Do the custom class, embrace the control.
But you wouldn't use grid there.
No, to that point, no. It's just I would always opt for Flexbox, and I think again, this is my own mindset. I think especially Penny can relate because like Flexbox, Flexbox at one point, you know, especially when it was early, it was like not supported in IE and all that. So like, yeah, came from a world of like, I'm gonna use whatever the most backdated thing and supported spec is, and then bleed up from there. And so like honestly, like when I was at ITA before Webflow, I think it was like the 3rd site maybe I ever built in Webflow. We had to support back to IE 10 or maybe even 9 because it was a medical company. And so I built the whole thing with floats and just old school style.
Yeah.
And but that's the power of Webflow, is you can actually do that. And I remember being so excited because it allows that control. It's Webflow is not dictating everything is grid or everything is flex. Like honestly, almost every other tool does. Like it's just, I think there's a lot of freedom in that and a lot of like power, much more similar to if you're just scratch coding, right? So
what were those things called? Browser resets?
Yeah, or just like
what was it called? Where you had to be like, I have to basically IE does all this crap and I need to like,
or I think another term is polyfill. I think you could use like JavaScript to, you know, essentially back support something that's not supported, like Flexbox or whatever. Like I know right now in Webflow, if you go to focus keyboard, we technically have a JavaScript polyfill for this. So that because focus visible, which is the CSS like pseudo selector that is being used here, isn't technically supported all the way back as far as we were supporting at this time when this feature was added. So, you know, again, Webflow does that, a lot of that stuff for you, browser prefixing, all that kind of stuff.
Browser prefixing. That's
maybe that's what you're thinking of, where you do like WebKit dash blah blah blah. Yeah, totally. So yeah, to that example, I totally still use grid sometimes, but you know, when I can, like this, you know, I'm still using the row and column system up here in the hero. And, you know, even look at this. Here's another example where like I wanted to very explicitly control the width of this element. So I'm just doing a custom class. I'm not going to try to like do a U-W-89.1% or something, right? Like just use the custom class when it makes sense. That way you have full control, right? So yeah.
Right. But essentially you need to really understand Webflow well too.
Totally.
Whereas with Reloom and Client First, you can kind of get away without you know, it helps you understand it. It helps you know, get better with it. But you know, you really need to know Webflow well to make this work.
Yeah, totally. And I think you nailed it, Penny, because like, and that's the whole point of me having this last slide here is I was like, this is just the tip, you know, like you really to best utilize something like this, the more you understand, the better it is. And I think an example too is like, again, this was yesterday, I think I got a DM on Twitter from Joel Whitaker, who's in the community. He built like Alfie Dev and some of these tools. He's just a straight up engineer that has just been trying to build tools on top of the Webflow community. And he messaged me, he's like, yo, MAST is so great. Like, you know, and again, because he just comes from this developer world. And so he's used to a lot of the concepts and understands CSS. And so for him, it was very quick to pick it up because again, bootstrapping things that people have used over the years, like you just get used to that. And so it feels familiar. And I think honestly, for me, that was a lot of the inspiration with even like, do I have the MAST page up still? Yeah. So a lot of these sites, like ended up having teams. So, and maybe this was just, you know, our use case, but like ShapeMaker, a lot of the teams we work with, like this one, Alto, are startups. And so they have engineering teams. And at some point, the engineers get involved, right? Because there's some custom thing. Like if we go to the live Alto site, an example is like this type ahead, right? If I like put in an address, you know, it renders from some API called Smarty Streets, and this was in their product and they wanted it brought into Webflow. And so we ended up having this conversation, and I'll never forget, like they use this, one of the engineers said, like, I don't know how you do this in Webflow. And I'm like, oh, you do it the same way that you do it with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's no magic sauce here. And the irony was that, you know, engineering has gotten to this point, or specifically front-end development, where like now it's like, and I say this a lot of times internally, specifically to make the point that like, in my opinion, front-end development has left HTML and CSS for dead. Like it's that title of front-end development. Now you need to know React, Views, Felt, all those frameworks. And you're actually working with a lot more data and structures and NPM packages and everything. And unfortunately, HTML and CSS still is around, and we still need to build marketing sites and all this. But those people a lot of times have moved on. And so I think this is where Webflow, why it's so successful, is because it like is one of those tools that starts to fill that margin, right? Like a lot of us, either as primarily dev or primarily designer, can jump in and build things that still need to be built, y'all. Like, and so why I'm saying that is their first reaction from this engineering team was like, here's the React component, good luck. And I'm like, I am not loading React on this just for this one component. You are nuts. And, you know, so we ended up just like, it was like maybe 40, 50 lines of JavaScript to get this to render just with vanilla old school JavaScript and not some massive framework, right? Like it's this whole concept of like not reinventing the wheel and going back to basics that is just like, for me, infinitely refreshing, because like you can do so much with those fundamental tools, right? And so I'm saying all that, my gosh, I rant so much, because then
I was gonna say, Rachel, there's your YouTube short, was like a minute ago, was your YouTube short.
I made a note.
I done so many YouTube shorts probably from y'all. But then the main reason I was mentioning Alto is that we're still working with them. But like there's been times where we'll just pause and their engineering team, you know, several of them have gotten in and made updates and things, and they feel comfortable doing so because again, they're pretty familiar with HTML and CSS. So once they understood that the handoff is just that, you know, it was like it quickly lowers that barrier. And so my point is, you know, like using something like MAST that's already structured off things they may be familiar with, it just makes it so much easier to collaborate with engineering teams of clients or in-house, right? So yeah.
Well, and you also avoid that thing that happens when you use a system. I use client first, but
Yeah.
you know, when you use a system like that does add a lot of divs, you get, you know, developers who are like, well, that's awful.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not working with anybody else right now, so I'm not hearing that. But you know,
Right.
that can be one of the things that,
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
like,
Well,
that's
and
just
what it
not
also kind of does is they look at it.
right.
Oh, she's like a no coder. She doesn't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
yo,
Yeah.
I get that runs me the wrong way. But yes, like, and I think here's the other side of that general topic to me is like, unless the client, like I just said, is an engineer or a developer or somebody that has some code experience, I, at least this is just my own, I can only speak from my own experience. I have never had a good experience where a client or non-technical person got in the designer explicitly to make a change and it didn't break something, you know, like unknowingly too, like and so that's where, in my opinion, like it's almost a little dangerous to make all of it so easy and approachable that it seems like, oh yeah, I'll just, you know, come in here and just whoop, and this is just this one place and it doesn't matter. Because like I almost want a little abstraction so that not to make it scary, not to make it like intimidating, just to make it seem like, you know, it is a serious thing in a way. Like a way I've put it with designers, a way I've put it with designers specifically is like, no one will ever know if you design a poster in Photoshop, they'll never know what those layer names look like or care, because the end product looks the same. But when you build a site, no matter what tool you build it with, like there are implications to not building it well. Like it could be slow because your images are big, or it could just like responsively things start overlapping and breaking. Like there's actual byproducts negatively if you don't do it well. And that doesn't mean it needs to be perfect. It just means you need to give a damn and like, and not just be messy about it. You know what I mean? Like it's just, I don't know. But anyways, y'all, whew.
Can you've Corey, virtual high five.
That's all. Virtual hats off.
I have a question for the group that came up to me today, and I wanted to round table this because it was a real life situation. I had a prospect reach out. As I said, I don't take on a lot of clients. Just like when I'm feeling like I want to use up my free time. So they reached out, they need a new website. So I went to their website and looked at it, and it was, it's a simple marketing site. They showed products on their site, but they didn't actually, anyway, they didn't sell products. So I was like, oh yeah, Webflow would be great for this. So then I had a call with her. She was like, I've never heard of Webflow. So I recorded a quick video of what the editor's like, sent it, and then she called me. So we talked today for, I don't know, we talked for a while. Anyway, well, it turns out there's a membership side of this. They are a wholesale retailer. So what happens is you can go to their site, you can browse their products, but you can't buy anything. You need to log in. And then once you log in, then all of the e-commerce functionality kind of unveils itself. And I was talking to her about what some people will do is they'll kind of separate church and state here. And what they'll do is they'll have a marketing site that does marketing. And then when someone clicks like log in to buy, now you're in like a different app, you're in a different thing. And they do stuff, they do wholesale. So people want to have an account. They probably want to see their past orders. They want to see probably orders, status of the orders. They maybe want to save a cart so that they could come back later and then edit that cart, all those things. And so I told her, I was like, you know, in this situation, I don't actually think Webflow is the right tool for you to use as your e-commerce platform. And then we started getting it, you know, talking about other things. And I was like, you know, I think Shopify would be a nice, like a lot of people, because there's so much interest, there's so much developer interest. They do a really good job with their integrations and like actually the experience checking out. So all these things. Would you have guided her elsewhere? Would you have not, well, one, would you have said Webflow could do this kind of thing? Or when it comes to e-commerce, unless it's so simple, you're taking them elsewhere. So that's my first question. Would you have recommended against Webflow? And then would Shopify have been your thing? Or is there something else that people are using for their e-commerce? E-commerce, it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other. You could find a plugin on WordPress. You could keep going on your Joomla site. You know, you could do Drupal, whatever it is. So that is my kind of question for the group, and I'm curious if there are any thoughts.
I'll jump in. I would probably recommend BigCommerce only because I have not actually built in Shopify, and I am pretty certain that BigCommerce could do that sort of, you know, hiding until you're logged in. And then I know that there are like wholesale, you know, you can sort of set up different pricing for different types of people and things like that.
Okay.
I would definitely not have suggested Webflow. Although, what I do know is that, but I've not tried it, there are ways of connecting and using BigCommerce in a kind of a headless way and using and connecting it into Webflow. But I have not explored that whatsoever because I don't have a lot of e-commerce people.
Yeah, plus one, I probably would have done the same thing and just like not a Webflow use case. The only times I've done e-commerce in Webflow, which I think is like 3 sites, and then like Derek, you had a great use case that I like talked to you about. It's generally simple, right? And the main priority of why you would use it is for design, right? Like the other one that comes to mind is like Precious, which is the office, the like design studio I work out of that I mentioned. I'll drop a link. Is just like, you know, just a simple like shirt, hat, you know, couple simple design oriented things. And Shopify is great, but really all this person needed was like really nicely designed UI and being able to have a simple checkout and, you know, managing system. Like if it goes beyond that, yeah, Shopify, WooCommerce, something like that. I mean, personally, I think like I would probably recommend Shopify, but even then I'm like, I'm not a pro, and I would never be personally the one that'd be like, yeah, I'll build the Shopify site for you, because that scares the living daylights out of me, candidly. Because like, e-commerce is just so much more complex. There's so much more to consider usually in terms of like legal and tax and yes. Yeah.
Well, and you're generally, unless you're using the Shopify inventory management system, you're generally like integrating with something else, and that which now not that us lowly no coders can't figure out complex things, but now it's getting a lot more complex, I think, to your point.
Or I think the best route I've seen in terms of still staying in Webflow, however, the membership side of it would be the added layer. Again, you could do it, of course, member stack, or I'm a big Outseta fan. But I've seen that like people doing with buy buttons, right? So Shopify has like a buy button, which is basically just an embed, and every product has an ID. And so you can create a collection in Webflow that is products, and then have a field for the ID that you just add, you know, dynamically into the embed. And then at least in the last, like, I want to say year, when buy button first came out, it was like you had to buy each product individually. There's no cart experience. And now there is. So that's at least better, where like
that's Shopify or Stripe?
Shopify. I think
Stripe has a similar thing.
Yeah, Stripe has a similar and more recent thing, for sure.
I don't know that you can do multiple. Can you do multiple products with Stripe?
Yeah, I don't think you can with Stripe.
Right. It's like it takes you right to the cart.
Right.
Checkout.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's an option if you ever want to consider, you know, again, still on the simple side. But yeah.
Because then you'd have to figure out a way to hook up your inventory to your Webflow CMS, because if you run out or if you add something new, you don't want to have to be doing this in two places.
Right. Yeah. And again, you can do it because there's a CMS API and there's a Shopify API for all of that stuff. So you can
Does Whale Sync have a Shopify?
Not yet. I think
Matthew, if you're listening. Yeah.
Big Whale Sync fan here as well. I just, oh gosh, it's so good. If I honestly, it says highly requested Shopify on their site, but like, I think once they dip into that, if they can do it well, like we'll just say there's money to be had for them for sure, because e-commerce is such a massive segment. And so, yeah, I don't know.
I did a Whale Sync integration the other day, and it was really small. It was like our 10 locations, but I had our locations hooked up. So I had all my locations in Airtable and all our locations in Webflow. And it had been running and it was just fine. And then I was like, oh, I actually want to, for some reason I needed to sync them. So I synced them, and then I did not listen to their advice of like, you should probably have one of these things empty. And so I synced them, and then I ended up with duplicates in Webflow, and it was just, I was like, oh no. And so I spent the whole day like deduping and bringing over IDs into my Airtable, and
totally. It's when I first used it, I was like, this is very time, it saves me a lot of time. It's helpful. I think it's worth it. But then now more recently, we've had 2 projects internally at Webflow that we're almost using it more like an app infrastructure. So like one example is our sales team will put on these, like, they're called field events, where it's like a dinner to, get enterprise leads in and talk and schmooze them, I guess. And then other, like, even like South by Southwest was a few weeks ago, and there was like a happy hour at a Hunt Gather, like a Webflow agency. And so we built this platform on top of Airtable and Webflow, and then Whale Sync in the middle. And so, the simple side that you've probably seen is like, you can just use Airtable. And then in this case, we're using interfaces side of Airtable so that we can create like an app type experience. So they can create an event, put in all the details, it automatically creates the page in Webflow for them. And then the app side of it is that every time somebody submits the registration form, there's also a field in Airtable of like max capacity of like, say 10, right? And as soon as that 10th submission comes in, and we're using automations in Airtable to update and add that new attendee or that new registrant as a record, and then we just have a count field, and then a formula field getting the difference that we also send back to Webflow, and then use that difference to do conditional visibility of like, oh, now the event's in waitlist mode. And so now we'll show the waitlist form, right? And so it, like, because it's like not real time, of course, if we were inundating this with 50,000 people, this wouldn't work. But like with this kind of use case, it's great for that, right? And yeah.
What would you do if you wanted to, on the website where it's showing South by Southwest, 10 attendees left, and then it was like it said Des Moines No-Code Meetup, and then 50, and so you've got all these events.
Yeah.
And they're all stored in Airtable.
Mm-hmm.
How would you put the count, the event count? We're really excited. We have 17 events this quarter.
Yeah.
And because your event list is always kind of, you're adding and then some get done, and so they get moved off. How would you do that?
So you want a roll up of the total attendance of all across all events? Is that what you're saying?
I'll do you one better.
Show me the example.
Show us what you're building.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I think
because
while you're pulling it up, the short answer is like, if it's in Airtable, it can be in the CMS and Webflow, right? And so that then makes it pretty easy to add to the page.
You think that.
Yeah.
And I'm about to show you where I'm confused. Okay.
So essentially, you need to kind of do a roll up and get that number somewhere in a field.
Yes.
Yeah. I need to get a count, or I need to get a number of records.
Do you want a count of events, Or do you want a count of the total attendance across all events? Is that what you're saying?
Let me show you
We're
what.
talking about
Because
events.
either way, that either one should be possible.
Okay, 1 second. I just gotta. Oh, here.
It's always fun watching somebody try to figure things
Right.
out. On their
Right.
Log
computer.
in, do your single sign-on, get your code.
Hit the magic link.
Where's
All
my
right.
Open your
password?
email.
Password.
You can see where I am here, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is our company intranet.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got to go here. Okay. What? Let me see if it will. Oh, let me just grab the link. Because I've got a one thing I also want to do is I want to I want to have a better chart. What's going on? Sorry. Yeah, it's right there. Oh, you know what I'm doing? Oh my God, that was crazy. They have us using PCs at work now. And so I've got all my commands and my okay. So here we are. We've got this little HR. These are all of our employees. And so I've got an Airtable that has a record for each employee. And so then I'm counting them up by location. So we've got 144 in this location. We've got 20 in another. And basically what I'm doing is I've got a location. Well, why don't we just do that too? Let me see if I can. Rachel, you're going to cut this part from the video since there could be some, is that cool?
Oops.
I just gave you an editing task.
Oops, it's already live streaming on YouTube.
So here are all of our employees in the whole company, right?
Okay.
They've all got a department.
What are you're looking at Airtable? I can only see your browser.
You can only see
Yeah,
Webflow.
we're only seeing Webflow.
Let me see. What if I do the whole screen? Oh, you can see this one. Okay, I might just have to switch. But okay, I've got now you can see it.
Yep.
Webflow record for everyone. They've
Okay.
got a department. They've got a location.
Mhm.
Okay. And these are linked to departments and locations.
Love it.
So I come into my locations and I do a roll up or a count, right?
Love
So
it.
all of my locations have a count. This was the thing that I was like, I had my table in Airtable and in Webflow, and I initially synced them. Then I did the whale sync thing, and I got duplicates. And so anyway, so now I've got a count for each location. So I bring that in, and I might have to switch my share again. And now I've got a count in each. Let me get over there. Yeah, you're here. You can see this NPS score.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I've got a count in each location. Similarly, I have a count by department.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I'm able to, using the date of hire and date of termination, I'm able to see who's hired, joined us, and left us. Anyway, so what I want to do, I'm going to switch. What I want to do is I've got a list of 200 employees, 204 or something. I want to put a total head count on this page.
Okay.
I could create a CMS collection in Webflow that's like company stats. And in there, it would say company stats. And it would just be one record or whatever, I suppose. And then there'd be a field that said head count, and maybe there's like a turnover rate or something, right? But do you see what I'm saying? It's like, it feels like it's
like overkill.
Yeah, I'm creating a whole new collection because I
So
want to get one number on the page, which
I
is
think-
really just counting up.
Right. I think because of that circumstances, like if you don't have other stats, for example, for me, I would probably first do it on the front end, like with JavaScript. So, a script that says like,
That counts up all these.
yeah, it would just like be a for loop. So it'd say for each of those locations, get the item with attribute whatever that is assigned to the number, and then
Convert
add
that to a
all-
number and then add them all up.
add all of those numbers up, and then output it to a specific number up in the top, right? Like that's for me, that's probably what I would do. But if there's a need in the future, I think your other way is like, for me, what would come to mind is like, if we're going to have multiple things we want to just do math on in Airtable to make it easier and just have Airtable do its thing, and then WhaleSync do its thing, then yeah, like, I don't think it's also wrong to do another collection that is for that purpose. Right.
Yeah. And then I was thinking, okay, so what if my collection has like a total head count field, a turnover field? We've got an HR system that's got more stats. So like head count by generation, millennials, Generation X, baby boomers, etc. And so I was like, what if every month someone just filled out a form that had 4 data points in it and they submitted it, and then those could get added, and then we've effectively solved our problem, right?
Right.
Wouldn't be a real-time count. So if in the middle of the month someone left or came, your JavaScript idea is probably better. Anyway, 2 other questions. One, or maybe just one. What do you use to embed charts in your pages? Because I've got I like my Airtable interface is great. It works, but I don't know how to get. I was just lucky that this, I use mini extensions. You guys ever use mini extensions for Airtable? It's this.
I have not used it, but I've seen it, and
Can you still see? Did you see that I just Googled?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is one of those parts of the internet that I just get frustrated with, because there's several things mini extension does. One of them is like converts rich text to HTML in Airtable. But I'm like, I don't want to pay $70 a month for you to just run some code over my script every time, or over my base every time. Like, isn't it something? It's like, it's not cheap.
Let's check it out.
Yeah.
I think you pay.
Holy
Billed annually. This is annually.
But it's still per month. $119 a month.
Wait, hold on. Start a 7-day free trial. 119. Wait. Oh, per month billed annually. I was like, it's $119 annually.
No, it's $120 a month. So it's like
we have it at my company. I did not pay that.
Okay.
I must have gotten on a cheaper, because what we were able to do now, this was actually great. I'll show you. So someone comes here and they go to the directory, and they choose, you search for Kyle, and here I am. And now I can update my bio. And what this does is, this is a mini extension right here, because all of my data is saved in Airtable. But now anyone can come here and I can put in my email address. And what'll happen is, so anyone can put in their email address, Krista. And what'll happen is, I'll get a code sent to me. Let's see if I can, I don't know if I have that. Let me see.
And then this will let you update your record data.
And then that lets me update my record. I've effectively created a portal where users, 200 users or whatever, I've got my code here, I think. Oop. So now I've now logged in, and now I have decided what I want people to be able to update. And they can now update things on their own, instead of them like, I didn't know how to give users gated access to one record in an Airtable. And this allows me to do that.
That's pretty dope.
Yeah, it's $120 a month.
I mean, I could tell you ways to do this without spending that,
How would you have done it?
How I would have done it is like,
You would have built a glide app for $40 a month.
No, I think the part I was gonna say, but the hardest part of that is the sending you a key, because you need to pay for some transactional email service to do that. If you didn't have that part though, and you either use like Webflow memberships or like, you know, something to manage at least like a basic password, then without that piece. So again, it's not really fair for me to even say this, because that's still an important piece and worth probably what you're paying. The other side of what I would have done is just have a Webflow form on a hidden page, and then on page load, then you would know ideally somebody's record ID by, you know, on page load again. And this is also going to be code oriented, so sorry, but with JavaScript, you could go hit the Airtable API, find their email, then get all that data and then populate it and like auto fill it into a Webflow form. And then, man, something that I use all the time now as a workflow is Connor Finlayson, the godfather of building apps on top of Webflow and Airtable. He has a Webflow Forms to Airtable. He has this YouTube video where you don't even need Zapier. You just, if you have an Airtable account that has automation access, which is, I think, is just the basic plan, like the lowest entry plan, then, you know, you just go create an automation, and he walks through it step by step in this, and you know, trigger on a webhook. And then in Webflow, you go in the project settings and say, I want a new webhook trigger on form submission, paste in the link that Airtable gives you. And then you can now just map all of that data that comes back through, and you can create, update, whatever with records. And so it's super powerful as a workflow to like have full design control over forms and customizability of forms in Webflow, but then have the data go to Airtable without the need of Zapier and stuff.
I'm doing it with Zapier right now, and it bugs me. But do you ever think to yourself, and Corey, I would put you in this bucket of things,
yeah,
people, where you think to yourself, how do they have enough time in the day? How do they get this much done? Dude, what am I doing wrong?
The only way I can ever express it is like just, and I say this too, and this doesn't mean that you don't do these things. Let me be clear, is like, it's just being very strict with my time. And then like, I just don't, dude, this stuff's my video game. Like that, I still watch Netflix shows and all that with my wife and relax, but like, I just genuinely love this stuff. Like, it's probably clear in some of my nerdy comments and sayings is like, I just think this is so freaking fun. And like, and you asked about this right when we joined today about like, what are you getting on a no-code supply co? Let me share my screen really quick, and then we can hop off since it's probably getting late. This is the base for no-code supply co. And just like I think the funnest part was this. Again, I would not proclaim myself a JavaScript pro, but just a little bit I have
scripting is awesome.
Yes, the little bit I've learned over the years, and then once I got the taste of Airtable scripts, and explicitly this. So if anybody is watching and hasn't used Airtable scripts before, it is as it sounds. It's JavaScript that you can run on top of records in Airtable, right? And so you can do things to the records. However, to me, the most mind-blowing part of it is this, that I can add these essentially config that generate these over here. So once I have it set up, and by the way, I have most of these out on No-Code Supply Co. If you ever need to like do things like, by the way, Kyle, I'm pretty sure I mentioned to you, didn't you have a image compression with Kraken video?
Yeah.
This was all inspired by that. And so, you know, y'all gave me a huge head start on how to even approach this script. And then I was able to figure out enough with just, doing it over the years. And I don't use ChatGPT very often, but I use GitHub Copilot in VS Code all the time for like a little bit of AI assist. Highly recommend. And so between some of that, I was able to figure out anyways, where I'm getting is the config. You can like then just use these scripts across whatever table dynamically. You just select them, right? So if you want to do this on your own, you just go copy and paste it from No-Code Supply Co or whatever. And if it's been set up this way, you don't even have to touch the code. The fields are just there for you and automatically triggered based on your tables and your tables and views and all that kind of stuff, right? So,
okay, walk through this. What's going on here? You're choosing a table, you're choosing views.
Yeah, a view. And then so because this was actually, I don't really use most of these anymore. These are all now in automation. So every time a record gets added, if there isn't a screenshot, go get one. If there isn't metadata, go get it. That kind of stuff. All this happens automatically so that like our workflow is pretty seamless. Like the way Max and I put it, have you ever heard the like build in public saying online? This is so crude and I'm sorry, but I'm going to say it anyways, that we were like, we both have 2 young kids that are each within weeks of each other, like 4.5 and 9-10 months. And we're like, we don't have time to get on our computer every time. We want to run all this from our phone. In fact, we're parents. The only moment of silence we have is sitting on the toilet, to be frank. So it's like, we're going to build on toilet, this whole joint. and so like, that was our mentality, is like, there's a great Airtable app, mobile app. And so the hope and the goal of all this was, hey, we found a sweet site or resource. I'm just going to go create a record and then it's going to go do everything I need. All I need is a name. I can assign it a type and give it a link and it'll do the rest. And then we just have to double check it, switch it to published. And now WhaleSync goes and grabs it and publishes it live. Right. Wow. And so I just published that and I don't know if it's all tagged. Good. It's like, oh, I think this is missing personal. Oh yeah. Max added this one. We're going to fix that. Agency oh wait, no, it was personal portfolio. Yeah. So anyways, it's so
I have I'm looking at doing a programmatic what you're talking about here is like effectively like programmatic SEO.
Yeah. I mean, we're still doing a manual input, whereas like programmatic SEO, I think technically would be like, based on some API of data that somebody else is updating, like users or something that is then syncing back, right? Like ironically, also, I didn't answer this question earlier. Charts, I have used Chart.js in the past. There should be some Webflow clonables out there if you look it up.
Okay.
I know.
In fact,
FinSuite's, yeah, it's actually something FinSuite's adding.
Nice. Yeah. Totally.
They are.
I don't.
Somewhere it might be in FinSuite Plus or something. It's something.
Somebody else, was working on this too as another tool that may be worth checking out.
Supercharged. I love a good SaaS product that solves a niche problem.
And it works with Airtable and Webflow.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay. Here, let's just go to the back end of. Actually, we don't need it. So Alto, this site that I mentioned, was a freelance client with ShapeMaker. They're like a Zillow alternative, kind of, just based in the Bay Area right now. And if you go down in the footer here, there is these like search by county, and the levels are like state, county, neighborhood, zip code, and city, I think. And every single day, a job, which in this use case, one of their engineers wrote all the code for this. And then it's just a job that runs on their server every day and then goes and hits their API, looks for any new listings, and then goes and updates the CMS with them. So like these right here showing the actual listings should always be current. Well, this is in private mode. Maybe they need to update filtering. Yeah, there you go. It's like a current listing, right? So this is programmatic SEO in the way that it also will generate any new neighborhoods that pop up because of new listings, etc. This is just what came to mind for me, at least with yeah.
So I was maybe using it more in a more rudimentary fashion, but I'm looking at taking a list of all the industries that our company works with.
Yep.
From a business standpoint, for a business insurance, and then effectively creating a page that is like insurance for industry name, right?
Totally.
So we've got 500 industries that we work with, and then we load them into Airtable using data fetcher. We use the ChatGPT generator. And so I was actually working with Mike, who was on the meetup earlier. He's designing the page for us.
Nice.
So there's going to be like a few different zones where we need to come up with custom text and filling in those chunks of content in Airtable using the data fetcher ChatGPT API.
Yeah.
And then using automations in Airtable to generate the open graph image, the ChatGPT to create the page, the meta tags or the meta descriptions, all that stuff. We were thinking about using DALL-E to create the images for like the hero images, and it's still a little,
yeah. No, that's totally programmatic SEO. Yeah, absolutely. Like, and
then whale sync to keep it up,
Yeah, and even that approach is great. Like, it's data fetcher is one I was looking at too for No-Code Supply Co. Again, I was just trying to like bootstrap it as much as possible, just do it all with code. But it's great. Like, data fetcher looked super dope. And I've seen some videos, like I think
Connor did a video on it. That's how I heard about it.
Yeah. And I want to say like this one too, maybe is on No-Code Supply Code, that he walks through using Airtable. And I think he was just doing the open API directly in an Airtable script. So instead of using data fetcher, just using it with code to hit, because the API is pretty simple, relatively speaking. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's, dude, I think I just have never, obviously I'm a Webflow fan. But ever since Airtable scripts and I started dabbling with all that more, I've just like, I love Airtable so much. Like, the other thing we really want to do that we just haven't got very far with, the only thing that's running with this concept is tweeting, is like, I really want to use Airtable for like all the marketing tooling, right? So people usually pay for like Hootsuite and then, a separate newsletter automation tool and all that. And so like the Twitter one was simple because there's already a Twitter connection in automations natively. And so then I set up the base in a way, or the table in a way, that we can like, pre-write tweets, schedule them for a specific date, and then on that date and time too, they will then go tweet, right? And so we can just do a bunch of it ahead of time, as well as like pull data like images and links and text and titles from all of the items within No-Code Supply Co. So it's like your data is already there and you just want to publicize it or market it. And so it makes it so easy to do that. And that's just like, for me, the dream is like, I want to figure out how to do that for every major social media channel, blog, newsletter, and then package it somehow. So it's like, here's all the scripts you need to do all of this. And then like, again, it's this like marketing toolbox in a box for $10,000, please.
Right?
Really, yeah. The one thing to know, I don't know if you are aware of this, but when you set up a tweet in Airtable, you cannot tag.
I know, it sucks.
It makes me crazy. It's like,
it does. And candidly, yeah, I think that's been part of the reason we've slowed using it lately, is just because like it's such a crucial thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I have notes still on how to maybe do it manually, but it's just annoying. Like I think
Can't like escape out of the character or anything.
well,
no, it's
about data privacy and stuff. But you know what? I mean, with all the changes Elon's making and throwing people away and stuff like that, I mean, maybe that'll, maybe there won't be any worry about tagging people.
And actually, I thought the Twitter API, technically, if you want to do certain things now, it costs money. Like, it's not entirely free anymore. And that might be part of it, right? And so because of the data thing, because the most I could tell when I was looking at the docs is you have to make 2 API calls. You have to first make the API call to look up the mention, look up that person's username, get back their ID, and then make another API call with the actual tweet that includes the person's ID in the handle mention, right? And so it's like, again, a pain in the butt. I would equate it to like, so Kyle had a video on using the Kraken API to compress images. So nice of an API. I'm fully willing to pay $5 a month for it, compared to TinyPNG that has a free API, limited, but it's the same way, where if you want to compress, convert and resize all those, you have to do 3 API calls to do that. Whereas Kraken, I can do it in one pass. And so it's yeah.
Have you noticed that when you like, we'll have people who will submit a photo and it'll be portrait.
Yeah.
It'll automatically go out and get compressed and resized. And then when it gets saved back into the field in Airtable, all of a sudden it's landscape.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. And then what happens is I'm like, oh, shoot. So I delete it and then I try to do it again and it still happens. So I have to take those images out, manually resize them, and then drag them and load them back in.
But
Luckily,
it's not every time. Sometimes it does it
no,
right.
sometimes it's fine. So
Weird.
it's a weird thing.
Is it only with portrait images, or
No, like
some portrait images will do that and some won't?
yeah, I'm sure if I like tried to debug it, I could probably find a pattern, but it comes in and I'm like, oh my God, we've got a like a sideways photo. So I just go fix it right away. But
it could be the photo that's being uploaded. Right?
Yeah.
Like if it's coming from a phone and it's been taken, you know, in that orientation, it's like a weird thing. I don't know if it's in the EXIF data or where it's coming from, but sometimes I'll notice it's like, yeah, it looks fine there. And then it gets uploaded somewhere and now it's not fine.
Yeah. Like one of those weird, when they took it, they had it in the wrong, the phone had it in the wrong orientation. So they had to edit the photo and then tilt it. And now those are the ones, like, it could be something so weird like that.
It's something strange in that way. I bet you would find that if you really dug into it. It might be easier to just fix them.
I wanted to share one last thing before I gotta go. So been getting into Airtable, right? I've been doing more and more and more of it as we've talked about. Love Airtable. And as I've been doing stuff in my company, they're like, people are like, oh, this Airtable thing's really cool. Like, you should really show us how to do it. So I was like, well, why don't, like, we have this little group, I call it like our technology advancement group. And so I get everyone to meet monthly and we talk about projects that we're doing. Anyway, they're always like impressed with Airtable. And so I'm like, well, show of hands, how many people would want to learn Airtable? Every hand in the room. And there were like 10 people in this group. So then I was like, all right, well, let's do a course. And so then I found other people at the company, and I got, my list is now like 22 people long that they want to learn Airtable. So I called Aaron Kornblum and I was like, can we do your course at my company? And he was like, heck yeah, let's do it. So we've paid to have all 22 of our people go through his ultimate guide to Airtable.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. Aaron and his friend, his buddy, Nick, Pardo. I can't remember his last name.
Nick. Yeah.
Nick used to work at Airtable. Nick interviewed Aaron for his Airtable job.
Nice.
And so Aaron and Nick, we had our first session last week. Aaron and Nick, actually, they were like, don't watch any videos this week. We want to come and we want to host the whole thing. So Aaron did a 1 hour, like, just overview of Airtable for the 20 people who were a good chunk of us were all together, but then the rest were remote. Yeah. And now what we're going to do is every week hereafter, we have these 20 people who we're going to watch his videos together. And then they, either Aaron or Nick, are going to show up on the last 15 to 30 minutes. And they're going to answer questions and see how it's going. And so it's super pumped about it. Everyone's really excited.
I love it, man. We've tried to make a rule on brand at Webflow this year: no more sheets, death to sheets, because it's just, why not use Airtable? Like, it's just, there's so much more flexibility in certain things and organization and sharing and all that, like, of course it's not a reality. Like, especially a lot of teams will still use sheets because that's what they're familiar with. But it's just like, when it comes to working with any of our sites, like, it's just a no-brainer. There's just too many resources now.
It's not cheap. It's not cheap. Are you guys enterprise? Are you guys enterprise?
Yeah. Webflow
for enterprise too. $70 a month for a person.
Yeah. I mean, that's,
really?
I would say that's the thing is, we already use it so prevalently that it's like, let's just use it. Let's go all in and like really take advantage of it. Yeah, but I agree. It's not. But I mean,
So there's tiers. You can be a builder, which
Mhm.
means you can like create and do all the stuff. That's
Yeah.
$70 a month. If
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
just someone who comes in and like edits fields, you're like add information,
yeah,
then you're $35 a month.
nice.
And then you can be a viewer, and that's just like, that's not, but still you're looking at it, you're like, $70 a month is not,
But
that's not,
I
that's
mean,
not cheap.
when you think about it, it's like I especially used to joke at this in my previous employer is like I swear a requirement of certain levels of company won't acquire other software unless it costs them at least like 50 or 100K. Like,
Yeah.
like Paul, who is here, mentioned that I kind of brought Webflow to ITA Group, and the battle in making that happen was all even involved with that. Like they bought some other tool that I won't name, and I won't name the value, but it was an absurd amount of money. And we could have done everything that tool did in Webflow. And it was so hard for me to swallow, because it's like, and seriously, there was a rationale that like, sorry, it can't be legit. It can't be secure if it's only $20 a month. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's such a like Microsoft fundamental. No diss on Microsoft, but you know what I mean? Like it's such a just like, I don't know. So I'm saying that because like $70 a month per person is like probably a drop in the bucket when you think about people that pay $500,000 a year or more, right? For like all kinds of software that is like also archaic. That's the wild thing. Like, has anybody ever used Marketo or I can't think of the email marketing tool that we used to use at my previous job. I can't think of what it was called, but it was the same like as Marketo, where it's just like literally looks like the UI was probably last refactored in like, I don't know, 98 or 05 maybe. Like it's and I get it, but like people still pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for that. You know,
the main
like
tool that runs our company, they were like, we did a big interface update. Like we're unifying all of the UI. All they did was change like the background color of their menu to be black. It was like, this is, yeah.
And don't get me wrong, you don't have to have beautiful UI just for it to be a good product. It's just like it, I think for me,
It shows a level of care.
It does, you
and
know,
forward
and like,
thinking and being relevant. And
yeah.
So I actually really think when I look at a product and I see like, is the design good? Like, would I want to use this? Does this make sense? Is it intuitive? Is this the kind of thing that I come in here and I feel like it's modern? I care about that because to me, that inherently says something about whether or not this company and this tool is a modern tool, or if this tool is something that is behind the times. And is this company making investments in improving their tool to stay relevant? Or are they like a set it and forget it? Because I don't want to work with set it and forget it.
Totally. It's
YouTube short that, okay?
There.
We probably should have stopped recording about 20 minutes ago.
I know, we're just ranting now. We're just ranting.
We're just bashing.
Rachel's gonna have her editing job to do here. I have to go to bed, guys.
Same.
Likewise.
Same.
Passing out here. So
yes.
Love the conversation. This is always great.
Been great.
Yo.
It's been lovely.
Derek, we got to get coffee soon.
Yes, we do.
All right, y'all.
All righty. Good night.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Take it easy.
Later.
Nice to meet you guys.
Bye. Nice to meet you too. Hope to see you again.
Take it easy. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.